meeting to order. Let's all stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so the first item is approval of the minutes of August 20th, 2019.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, I'd like to propose an amendment. There was it's a complicated discussions we had last time, and it looked like there was a typo. When I was quoted, it said I was open to the idea of 5th grade, but it would save money. But I'm pretty sure I said that I was open to the idea if it would save money, but it will not, and I didn't see any curricular or student advantages. So I would like to amend the minutes as sent to us that way. Is that, so moved
Madam
and
Chair, I have one
seconded?
other question to Mr. Kuna. It says in the
Okay.
minutes that Fox Hill had 7 classrooms. Is that the right number, Bob? Divided in 2? That's what I thought.
Only one.
Okay, so I would move that we amend the minutes also under the communication so that it says Fox Hill, 1 classroom was divided into 2 parts.
One classroom divided into 2 parts. Okay, so do we have a motion for that? Or well, do we have a motion for both?
Motion to approve as amended, Madam Chair.
As second. Okay, all those in favor of the amendments?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, that's 4-0-1-0. And then, so now the motion is to approve the minutes as amended. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The chair votes aye, so it's 4-0-0. Thank you. Now I'd like a motion to approve the minutes of September 10th.
So moved.
Second?
That wasn't there, so.
I wasn't there either.
We only have 2 people who were there.
Have to
Should we
wait for
wait
Mr.
till
Murphy.
Mr. Murphy
Yeah.
comes back? Okay, we will put that on hold. All right, so now it's time for public participation. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment? Okay. And now we have our information and reports, and our student representative, Bridget Conceição, is here.
Yes.
So please let us know what's been happening and your concerns.
So our first plenary session is October 1st with everyone, and that's our first time as an executive board, like leading a meeting, and we're starting our pie sales, so that'll be good. And then I'm a part of the Writing Fellows at the school, which is a course that I take, and we are opening a writing center on October 18th officially. And it's a student-based writing tutoring center where students can come get help if they need on writing assignments. And our goal for the space is for it to be comfortable and inviting, where students feel low pressure to get help for assignments, either if they're big or small. And they started it last year, but I wasn't a part of it, so this is my first year. And we reached out to Mr. Sullivan today, asking for assistance in paying for key pieces of furniture, like seats and circular tables we need for tutoring. And on behalf of the center, we wanted to invite whoever could make it anytime that day, during the school day, because we're taking a half-day field trip, so it'll be manned like all day. And then I have one copy of the email we sent to him, if I don't know.
Okay,
Sure.
that's great. We
That's
can
fine.
include
Put it
that.
in the
Thank you. So the opening is on October 1st?
October 18th,
Oh, 18th.
Yeah.
Okay, got that.
all day.
All day.
Mhm.
And you're inviting us to come?
Yes.
Should we let you know, or is there a teacher we should let
Miss
know?
Matana, but you can let me know if you
Okay,
want.
Or why don't you let me know? And then
excellent.
I'll take care
Okay.
of that.
Great, thank you. It sounds like you're well-organized,
Yes, we're excited.
well-planned, and it is nice. I did hear about it last year, but
Yeah.
it sounds like it's a little more,
I think we moved spaces because we
Okay.
were in the upper library,
Yeah.
and it was just like not really our own space. It was like kind of part of the like computer lab or something, and then we're now in the lower library where the ELL classroom was.
okay,
Okay, yeah,
great,
great.
thank you. Sounds like there's lots of good things going on.
Yes.
Good. Did you have something you want to add?
I
Dr.
did.
Conti? Okay.
Bridget, did Mr. Sullivan give you an answer?
No, I think she sent it out this afternoon because she has
okay.
2 writing fellow periods.
Would
so.
you like to apply pressure to Mr. Sullivan? Is that-
That sounds like
Yes.
fun.
Yeah, we're all in favor of that
All right,
request.
that's what I'm hearing. I
Yes.
just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Okay. All right,
Right,
we can take care of it.
Okay, thank you.
right, good. Thank you. Any other questions from
No,
the other
good job.
members?
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget.
No problem.
It's nice to see you,
Nice
Bridget.
to see you
I-
too.
I don't know if you were at the last meeting, I wasn't,
Yes, I was.
but, so, welcome.
Thank you.
Good.
And congratulations to your brother.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. All right. Do we have any, we're moving on to subcommittee reports. Do we have any other subcommittee
Send that to me.
reports?
Go ahead, I'll send it to you. Kristen, I don't know, did you, I had asked Tom to look into asking for an all-organic.
Yes, so Brian, I'm sorry, Brendan, I spoke with him and he reached out with an email to both myself and Brian from Tom Irwin, and I'm still waiting to hear back.
Okay.
So that's in reference to the school committee's policy to only use organics on the school property, and the rec department doing mostly organic, but asking about doing some other treatments as well. We're still trying to gather more information. So I'd like to ask if, I know Kristen's put a lot of effort into, she's talked to Brendan, and she's trying to get in touch with the fellow from our the consulting firm that works with the rec department. And I would also like to hear sort of what her questions are and what the answers are. So I would like to ask the committee if we'd like to actually invite the fellow from, Brian from the Tom Irwin Company, to come here so that we can all ask questions, and the questions that Kristen knows to ask that I wouldn't know to ask, I would be able to hear the answers to those. So what do you think, Mrs. Monaco?
When we met with them,
Mm-hmm.
they did say that they would be able
Mhm.
to provide us with a plan that was all organic.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'd like to do is ask them for that plan.
Okay.
And maybe then
Mm-hmm.
have them come, or if we're not satisfied with the plan, have someone else come who can do all organics. Because as far as the sales pitch goes, what they're already doing, we've already heard it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at least 4 of us. Kristen wasn't there, but we've told her all about it.
Yep.
So I'd just like to see what they can do that would not involve going with,
Mhm.
what's the word?
Synthetic.
Synthetic, yeah, synthetic
Mhm.
products.
I like that idea of asking for an all-organic plan, but I also would like to be able to hear the answer to some of the questions about the various synthetics that they were proposing to use. Do you
Mhm.
still want to do that, or would you rather just go for the?
Well, I would like to see the organic plan.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
I've not heard back anything,
Right.
so.
Okay.
So if we can get the all organic plan and then compare from there, because one of my questions just involved, do you have something less toxic
Mhm.
than what these two are being proposed?
Right. I also was wondering if, if we did have them come and explain both the plan they're proposing and also an organic plan that they might propose. And then if we felt we needed more information, we could invite a different consultant who's not currently working for the rec department. So are people in favor of moving forward with asking them to come from the Tom Irwin Company first and hear what their organic plan is, or do we want to just get that on the side and decide later about having somebody come? Go ahead. Yes, Mrs. Russo.
I think I'd like to see the organic plan
Okay.
first, and then be able to compare and be better prepared for whoever we then ask for questions.
I agree.
Just one
Yeah.
comment, I
Mr.
assume
Nelson?
the organic plan is gonna have a financial component to it, because that's
Mhm.
important.
Yeah.
That's one of the main reasons it can be difficult to go all organic.
Right. And the other thing that's also part of this is that it is the rec department that's doing the work, and so there'd have to be some discussion and communication between the school department and the rec department regarding where those costs would come out of, for example. Is that clear? Okay. So, Dr. Conti or Mr. Cuna, would you be willing to get in touch and ask them for an oral?
Tom did it.
He already asked for an organic?
Yeah,
okay.
Tom did it.
He asked for an organic plan?
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll check in then in the future about where we are. Do you have something else to say, Mr. Cuna?
No, I was saying, I'll follow up, make sure that request was done, but my understanding was is that they would provide, sorry, my understanding as well was that they would provide both an organic and a non-organic treatment price, just so we can compare the cost, and then the rec department would look at any man hours if need be to assist on that.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any other subcommittee reports? All right. Ways and Means, it doesn't appear that there's anyone here to give a report. And I'd like to put in here announcements. We sometimes have other things we want to report on, and if there are other announcements that people wanted to make, I thought this would be a good place in the agenda. So are there any other announcements that people wanted to make tonight?
No.
Okay, I guess I just want to remind people about the Diwali on the Common celebration next Sunday. It should be lots of fun, and I hope people can make it to that. All right, so now the next thing is the instruction and technology on the elementary tiered instruction data. Thank you, Dr. Conti.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. We're gonna get into the weeds a little bit right now. So I get excited by this stuff. Many don't, but if you could pass one of these packets down, we're very, and I know Mr. Murphy would not want to miss the opportunity, so if we could just put one at his desk,
Okay.
that would be great. Patrick, do you have one? There you guys go. We're all set. So, yeah, I think everyone else I distributed them to. So just a couple things that are, I think, critical to have this conversation is we're going to be looking at some numbers that represent, I think, student performance and progress. What I don't want anyone to lose sight of, and what I don't lose sight of ever, is that there's a tremendous amount of work that contributes to these numbers, and that's we're a people-centered organization, both in work by our students and work by our teachers and principals. And again, we happen to be looking at an elementary slice tonight, and again, we're looking at numbers, but again, these numbers represent just an inordinate amount of work, hard work and incredible talent, and we just have great, very talented teachers. I think sometimes there's a misperception, or at least when I sometimes talk to people who are non-educators who always say, oh, I've always wanted to be a teacher, and then they think that they can come into the profession at the elementary level, and I always laugh at them because I think people have the perception sometimes that the content may be simpler, and therefore the teaching may be simpler, but it's actually quite the opposite, is that the content may be simple, but the teaching, the pedagogy is really complex, and I hope you get a glimpse of that in looking at some of the information we're going to go around. The other distinction I want to make is between assessment and testing. There's often lots of conversations that we over-test our students, and I would actually support that argument at the state testing level, and we can talk a little bit about that. It's important that we're going over this data now, and I think this data is much more meaningful. This data to me is assessment data, and assessment data is data that we use to help shape our instruction, to target our instruction based on what kids need. And I think this data is far more useful, in fact, in terms of instruction, this assessment data, than some of the testing that we do for kids. But again, that's a philosophical argument, and we can have that later. And then the other couple things is in talking about the journey from sort of regular ed to special ed. Massachusetts subscribes and has historically subscribed to a discrepancy model. And discrepancy model is really looking at the differences between ability and performance. And what ends up happening is when you think about an alligator's mouth or something, when that discrepancy gets large enough is typically when there's an identification of a disability, and when support services, when specialized instruction is required and kicks in. And the whole point of gathering information like we're gathering is certainly not to deny that identification, but it's to try to not let the alligator jaws get as big as they are, and to try to address that sort of discrepancy that much earlier in the process, and to make sure that we are not waiting to change instruction, we're not waiting to look at making adjustments. And in the same way, it's not exact, but if you think about a medical model, if you're trying to diagnose someone and you're giving them a certain antibiotic and it's not having an effect, giving them that same antibiotic until they get really sick doesn't make sense. So you're gonna want to sort of change it up, and I think hopefully you'll see some of that changes now. There are lots of concerns, I know, with some of what we're doing, the structure of what we're doing, and Mrs. Monaco, again, I sometimes have your voice in my head when you talk about, is this sort of tracking, and I want to give data on how often the kids are changing and how we're looking at that. So that's included in here as well, and look forward to some feedback on it. And then the other thing, in terms of curricular effectiveness, because this isn't just about specialized instruction or targeted instruction or interventions for students who are having difficulty, this is a conversation really about the overall effectiveness of our regular curriculum, because the vast majority of our kids are in our regular curriculum. And so the triangle that, the model that this is based on, and the triangle that you should have in your head, again with the narrow top and a wider base, is, our general curriculum should be meeting 80%, our triangle that says 80, 15, 5. So 80% of our kids should be making progress in our regular curriculum. There's going to be 15% of our students roughly who get our regular curriculum but need some support, and then there's going to be 5% of our students that need significant support in our curriculum moving forward. So that triangle is really important. So the data that you're looking at first, which is the one that has the blue line up top, and Patrick is going to jump in and correct everything I say, and he's ready, so because we both were studying this, so Patrick, please jump in. This is ELA and math combined, so this is ELA and math. And if you come down and you look at the blue bars and you skip a bar, you'll see that we have the October universal screening, the February universal screening, and the June universal screening. So we're screening our kids basically 3 times a year, and we're looking at growth. And then when we're looking at how our students are performing, remember the standards are different. We're not applying the same standard in October, February, and June. There are different standards because the expectations change. The standards at the end of first grade are different than the expectations at the beginning of first grade. But I hope what you'll see is if you look at the green and really focus on the district boxes which are highlighted, I think you really see that 80, 15, 5 structure being represented. And again, it's not meant to be exact, and if in fact you see a higher tier 2, more than likely it's because we see fewer students in the tier 3. So I would say, again, in looking at this chart, and we have some other graphs that represent this, I think, more clearly, is what I would say is that our ELA and our math curricula seem to be, again, following that 80, 15, 5 model, and I would say, is our curricular effective? Looking at the growth our students are making, I would say it's looking very effective to me. The right side of this page, and again, we have graphs that I think show this data visually in a much clearer way. Look at the number of students who are being sort of intervened with, who are getting certain interventions, and they're changing because if a student is identified as having, for instance, a need, they may have a need in more than one area. So the teachers are looking at addressing sort of a need first and moving forward. So while we are universally screening 3 times a year, for many of the students whose services are changing, we're actually progress monitoring. It's another word. We're progress monitoring those students every 2 weeks. Some of those students actually weekly. So, so we are not waiting for that discrepancy. We're not waiting to fail, and I think that's really an important part of what we do. So if you turn to the next page, there are some charts that I think highlight this a little bit better. But again, the sort of the base data is what's on the first page, and then if you look at some of these other charts, you're seeing again tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 on the graph that's in the middle of the page, and again that's representing that triangle, the 80, 15, 5 that you should see. again, if we were seeing 50% of our students who were making progress in Tier 1, I would say that, again, it's called curriculum instruction. There may not even be an instructional problem, again, because I think our teachers are really strong. There may in fact be a curricular problem that we're not meeting our kids' needs. But I was saying, again, this to me is demonstrating evidence that our curriculum is effective, and of course, I think the foundational belief here is that our instruction is high quality.
And I just want to point out
Please.
that you'll see the numbers from October to June, that the numbers in Tier 1 actually increase. The number from Tier 2 is lower than it was back in October. And again, having mentioned that, I also want to be clear that it's not necessarily the same, those percentages aren't the same kids. But overall, the number, just to point out, the number does increase in Tier 1 from October to June, and that's typical.
So all this data is from the school year 2018 to 2019?
Last year, yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Is there time for a question, comment?
Please, you can
Okay,
ask
Mrs.
more
Monaco.
questions.
So the part that's called continue,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean kids that are continuing in that same tier?
Go ahead.
Yeah, possibly, but typically it means they're continuing to work on the same goal that they were working on from the previous meeting. So you'll see at the bottom, and it's highlighted well on, I think it's the last page of this packet, where it says number of students with a new goal. You'll see that number goes up, and it's a hierarchy of skills as new goals are, as kids go from one goal to the next, they build off each other, as you would imagine. So I think, again, to answer your question, sometimes that means some kids are staying in the same tier, but also it typically means they're working on the same goal that they were working on previously.
So if you see then the discontinue or the change, what do those mean? If it doesn't mean the same kid continues, what does it mean to discontinue?
Discontinue means they're back in Tier 1 for that next time frame until,
All right, so I'm feeling bad about my voice being in Eric's head, but I'm thinking tracking.
No, I know you are, which I think is a valid criticism, which I think is why it's so important to discuss. Again, we are not ability grouping kids, we are instructionally grouping kids, and it's a significant difference. And it's a difference with distinction. I know people always say it's a sort of,
Yeah.
they have that saying, but this is a true distinction, and I would really make that argument. I'm anti-tracking as well, but we have clear evidence of kids not only changing their intervention, but also moving from Tier 2 to a Tier 1, and we're seeing that movement. And it may be that a student, when they have a new intervention, if it's I want to give a concrete example, if there's some of the skills, as Patrick said, are foundational or building blocks. So we may be intervening with a kid on phonemic awareness. Once they've reached their goal, we may now need to do an intervention on phonics, but we wouldn't do the phonics intervention until we had met the goal in
But they'd
phonemic
fall into the
awareness.
continue group because they wouldn't move out of.
Correct, until they were sort of learning and able to function in Tier 1 without the intervention, without the support. And so oftentimes we can, again, catch a small deficit and fill that hole. So you don't want the kids sort of learning a basic skill like reading, and again, I've heard it described almost as Swiss cheese, where sometimes they can make progress, but if there are holes, then at some point, when the curriculum gets harder, those holes begin to manifest themselves. So by doing the type of screening that we're doing and looking at very individual skills in a granular way, we really try to fill in those holes to make sure that they can access our curriculum and make progress. So again, really the 10,000-foot view of this is we know our kids well. We know in terms of the progress that they're making. We are targeting interventions and particular skills that they need to have at each age group. I think our curriculum is well aligned with, again, national norms and suburban norms, because the assessments that we're using are based on that, and we're seeing that our curriculum, again, is following sort of that 80-15-5 model. And I do think we're getting to kids early, and we're recognizing their deficits, and we're trying to address those deficits quickly. And again, does that mean we're 100% successful? The answer is of course not. But I think that in speaking with our classroom teachers, our reading specialists, again, our math specialists, which I hope we can add additional math specialists with, our interventionists, again, they know our kids as learners, and they are really making sure that they're targeting the interventions. I think several of you have observed a data meeting, and I just think what I'm most impressed about, besides everyone's knowledge of, I think, how kids learn, is how well they know the students and how they're working as a team to address deficits that they're seeing. So again,
Can I just say something
please.
again, just to, I know Mrs. Monaco understands this, but just if people are listening, if we were doing, the old-fashioned tracking, you wouldn't see kids getting back to tier 1, because they never catch up. When you track kids who are lower abilities, they never catch up. So I think the data proves that kids are going back to tier 1.
That's what I
So they're
thought.
getting the core plus.
That's what I thought the continue meant, was that they weren't getting back.
Well, they're still getting the core curriculum, plus they're getting additional support to get them back to tier 1 ultimately. And I think the numbers over the course of the year show that we are getting those kids back. And we are hitting, again, the triangle is something that we keep in mind and we talk to with the principals and so forth. So again, I think the strict definition of tracking, I get it. People used to, I think, whatever they used to call them. I remember when I was in middle school, that was the case in particular. And the group I was in was, for math, it was 8-2. And I never caught up with those kids who were 8-1 in high school. So again, over the course of a K-12 career, if you have kids in a lower ability group and they're in that 2 group or 3, or they used to use, names for that.
Bluebirds, right.
Yeah, the bluebirds. You never would have caught up. And again, that's clearly, I just want to be clear, that's not what we're trying to do. And we're trying to get everybody back to the core without the support, so.
To follow up on this, could you show us where in this data, or tell us, so, we are keeping that 80% to 80 to 85% of the students everyone's getting the tier 1 instruction. And there's, 85% of the kids at one time are just in the tier 1 instruction. They're not needing the additional intervention, the tier 2 or the tier 3. But what you're telling me is that 15% that's in the tier 2 is not the same kids all the time. Is there somewhere in these papers that show how many kids are getting what they need in tier 2 for the skill that they were working on, and then they don't need tier 2 for a while until they hit another roadblock, and they might go back into tier 2, but they're not there's not 15% of the students who are in tier 2 all year. But I don't know how to read these charts to find that. Can you help us with that?
So I believe the second to last page
Yeah.
is meant to, actually, it's the graph that says number of students added to interventions.
Added to number, okay.
So
It's about
the
4.
number chart right above that blue
Mhm.
graph actually shows you the changes to students like who aren't, to show you they're not stuck in the same tier. That one that says change is basically telling you how many students are changing tiers during particular periods.
So at the top of that page, in October, 18 students either went into a tier 2 or went out of a tier 2.
I believe that's accurate, yes.
So the ad is, what is the ad?
Again, an intervention might have been added, or they might have, again, we might be, after the universal screening in October, we might be saying, okay, these students, we identified some deficits, they need support in these areas.
So we began the year, say, with 109 students getting additional interventions like a tier 2 or a tier 1.
Yeah.
And then 18, the change how's change and continue different from discontinue?
Again, discontinue would be, I think they would move back up without not needing any intervention, so they would
Okay.
move back into tier 1.
All right,
And then modify would be, again, maybe the intervention we were trying wasn't working, and
Okay.
we would modify that, and we're looking
Right.
at that data again every 2 weeks.
mhm,
New goal would be, as I said, maybe we reached our phonemic awareness goal, and now we need to
Okay.
set a phonics goal.
so then
Um,
they would, the new goal kids are continuing, but they're continuing with a new goal?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Again, because we're trying to match up the
Mhm.
intervention with the skill deficit is
Right.
really what we're trying to,
right,
what we're trying to do, and the better job that we sort of have that alignment, the more progress that we're seeing.
Mrs. Monaco?
I just have one other question. It's set up so that there is a classroom for tier 2 kids, right?
Mhm.
So, let's say teacher A is, and teacher B and teacher C are all doing tier 1, and teacher D and teacher E are doing tier 2. What you're saying with this moving in and out is that there are points in time when kids from teacher D's classroom will physically be moved into one of the tier 1 classrooms. But the classrooms are separate.
Yes.
Okay.
So they're instructionally grouped. So the way that that would look like, and let's say, all of our kids get foundations, and certainly Diana, you can jump in if you've experienced this more than I do, but I'll do more of the early elementary. So if, all of our kids get foundations. So if you look at the difference between sort of a class, that would be a tier 1 class and a tier 2 class, is, there may be some pace, but it's more intensity. So they're all doing the same units at the same time, but the tier 1 class, which again, Foundations is a real phonics-based program, those students might be getting foundations twice a week for 45 minutes because they already know their phonics and it's a reinforcement, and they might be getting into more depth during that other time. The tier 2 teacher, again, is in the same unit, but her students might get 5 times 45 of foundations and phonics because that's what her students need. So you try to narrow the teachable range because especially for a skill-based instruction like reading or sort of numeracy or early math especially, the teachers have to differentiate. So even in that tier 1 classroom, the teacher needs to differentiate for all of her students that are in front of her. But if she has kids who need to know phonics and kids who are reading, that teachable range is really difficult, and it's really difficult to meet everyone's needs. Also in that tier 2 class, though, you would have other staff. You might have the reading specialist with the group. You may have a tutor, an interventionist in that class. And so that, again, because reading instruction is taking place in small groups, and they would be working on particular skills with the groups they have. So even in that tier 2 group, you're going to see students grouped even further to make sure we're targeting the skill and working on it. There's certainly times for whole class instruction, but there's going to be a part of that reading instruction that's being done in small group. And again, I'm looking at my elementary teacher here on the board. I think when you walk into a reading class, for part of that class, you want to see small group instruction. And I think we're trying to create that opportunity for small group instruction as well. And as much as we are trying to narrow that, again, the teachable range in a classroom, there's never a classroom where it's completely homogeneous. So again, you're always going to have to differentiate. It's just going to be some of the skills that you're working on might do that. And what allows the kids to move from class to class is, again, they are following the same pace. So they're not it's not like someone gets through lesson 10 in foundations and someone else is on lesson 2. They're both doing the same lessons, they're just doing it with different intensity. And so students will be able to move in that intensity. And it's also, a lot of the schools, again, some of them aren't big enough, but a school like Francis Wyman, where there are 5 sections at a grade, it doesn't just go tier 3 and then, tier 1 and then tier 2. You might have a tier 1A. So you might have, again, a classroom that is just above and tier 2, and they might be doing phonics 3 or 4 times a week, but not 5 times a week. So again, the teachers are coordinating, and they're working really hard to make sure, again, they're targeting that instruction where they need to be. And again, we are instructionally grouping kids, and kids are moved where their instruction fits their needs best. And again, I think we have clear evidence of that, as well as having clear evidence of growth. And Susan Stone, who is our RTI coordinator, does a phenomenal job compiling all this data and keeping track of it and getting into the weeds when she needs to, but also looking at it and explaining it to people like Patrick and me from 10,000 feet, just to make sure that the model is producing the results that we we wanted to from the beginning. And again, we know our kids, we know when they're making progress, we're using this assessment data to shape and change instruction. And I'm gonna just contrast that with state testing, because state testing occurs at year end, and we're gonna have some results, and we want our kids to do well in the state test, but we're not getting the results from the state testing. They were just done in Barview today, right?
Yeah.
So we got the results from last year now, so obviously we can't use that information to shape instruction. It's too late for the students who took that assessment last year. So we need to have live information, and that's why state testing, from my perspective, is not a real instructional tool. It's an accountability tool. It makes sure that we're delivering sort of the state curriculum, and the teacher may be able to adjust her curriculum over time, over years, but it doesn't help her with the students that are in front of her. And remember, the state regulations, as they were first written, was looking at testing students grades 4, 8, and 10, so they weren't looking at doing it annually. It's only the federal law that sort of made that change to look at 3 through 8 every year. But again, if you're looking at what the information that we're collecting, I honestly think we could do away with the state assessment, the state test, and have better information on each kid, and have a better idea of where they are in our curriculum and how they're making progress. And again, I think it's due to incredibly talented educators, but that's the system in place.
Yes, Mrs. Russo?
In order to do the tiering that we do, it requires a lot of extra involvement with scheduling. Can you just touch upon that? You're making it sound easier than it is, and it's not this easy to be shuffling kids around in the elementary through different teachers. Has there been a budget impact? Have we had to add? I know at one point we were talking about extra phys ed teacher, I believe, to help make the schedule work, or am I thinking about something else? Because it's also the scheduling, and that takes a lot from the principals and the administration, the teachers.
Right, and the schedules in each of the schools are slightly different, but they have non-negotiable components to them. And I think we changed those non-negotiable components about 10 years ago. And it did require adding some specialist teachers. I think we added some teachers in music, and maybe added a PE teacher as well, because we were scheduling our core curriculum around the ability to deliver a music class with traveling music teachers. So essentially, the non-negotiables, and Patrick helped me, we said at least 90 minutes of uninterrupted language arts, ELA, and 60 minutes of math. Common planning time for the grade level teachers every day. And then a 30-minute non-overlapping, we called it an intervention extension block. You've heard it called a WIN block here, what I need block, a block of time where we can deliver interventions. Some of the grades have taken that 30 minutes and rolled it right into their language arts instruction, so instead of 90 minutes, they're getting 120 minutes. Others are doing, like I said, the WIN time that you heard about. But sort of those 4 pieces are the structures that we put in place, and essentially what we were saying is we needed to ensure that there was time to deliver our core curriculum without sort of pulling kids for the other important things that they're doing. I think music lessons are really important, but to pull a student from language arts for music didn't really make sense. And also with the students who are needing support, it doesn't make sense to pull a student from reading to give them support in reading. Because really what they need is the reading curriculum plus additional support if they're ever going to catch up. So that's what we were trying to do. And the day's only so long, and again, our principals are talented schedulers, and again, I think our teachers are doing great work. And then what we also tried to do is break down some of the idea that we have, again, 96 incredible teachers, but 96 independent contractors. So we wanted to say is if we have 100 third graders and 5 third grade teachers, that all 5 teachers are responsible for the progress of those 100 students. And again, some schools, again, are slightly different. Some schools, their teachers are specializing in a particular area, content area, especially in the upper elementary grades, 3 to 5, it can look a little bit different. But the K-2 teachers, again, they're taking responsibility for the growth of the grade and then really trying to make time to target kids. Because as Patrick, I just want to stress that if someone's behind and if they learn at the same rate as everyone else, they're growing, but they're going to stay behind the entire time. So a lot of our students who are behind actually have to learn at a faster rate in order to catch up, which really means their instructional day has to look different if they're going to catch up. So the structure, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, did require some changes in schedule that you all supported and some staffing. We also added, I think, very talented interventionists. And what's been great about our interventionists is they get high-level training. Many of them, or most of them, are certified teachers, and they've been a great farm system for our classrooms. So I think a lot of our homeroom teachers, classroom teachers that we've hired at the elementary level have come through the role of interventionist. And again, they know our kids. We get to see them in front of kids. They get to form collaborative relationships with the teachers in a grade. And I think we've had smoother transitions because we've had that farm system in place. So I know we often talk about instruction at a high level. This really is more detail than you all need. But I just wanted to stress that the elementary instruction that's taking place in Burlington, I think, is research-based. I think it's highly targeted, and I think that in looking at the data that we're seeing after last year, I'd say we had a successful year in terms of our curriculum and growth of our, again, the vast majority of our students. And then I just want to quickly, I know I'm losing you quickly, so I'm going to just try to move on to the purple. The purple one quickly, and Patrick, please jump in on this too. What you saw, again, the initial was the ELA and math combined. What you're looking at with the purple is our SEL curriculum, our social emotional learning curriculum. So those skills are learned as well. With a growing diverse student population, with higher levels of anxiety, societal anxiety that we're seeing manifesting in students, we're having to be very explicit about our instruction in terms of social emotional learning as well. So we have a curriculum in social emotional learning. Our tier 1 sort of curriculum is called Responsive Classroom, and we've done tried to get all of our teachers trained or had the opportunity to have all of our teachers trained. We are screening kids for social emotional skills. We're using a tool called the DESA Mini and the full DESA, and you're going to ask me the acronym, and I'm going to say it's the Devereaux
Student Strengths Assessment.
Student Strengths Assessment, and thank you. I think a couple things, you also have a handout that shows the DESA categories, and one thing I want you to see from that is it's a strength-based assessment, not a deficit-based assessment, so it talks about what the kids do and do well. And I think we ask our teachers to fill out this information on their kids because they know their students well. And then we look at
Yeah, the teachers fill out the mini. It takes about 2 minutes per student, and there's 6 ratings that they fill out for each student that they have. If a student gets flagged on the mini as somebody that we might be concerned about, then they take the full DESA. The teacher will do it. 72 questions. Takes about 10 minutes per student, and there's not a lot of students that get flagged on the mini. But that's the progression.
And then what do we do with this information? Well, I think, again, we try to target lessons to address some of the deficits that we see. So our guidance counselors are using this information. If they're doing some whole class instruction, or they have a support group, or they're working on a particular skill, or if there's a student who's showing challenges in transitions, then they can work on that child on transitions, and again, try to target an intervention or a curriculum or an experience to support where the teacher is observing a challenge in her classroom based on the strength-based assessment. So it's, and these assessments are aligned, Patrick, with the CASEL standards,
Mhm.
which again are the social-emotional, national sort of social-emotional standards for kids.
So just quick, just to
Yes,
understand the
please.
tiers at the top, the tier 1+ means the student's on the guidance counselor's radar, but there's no direct services. The tier 2 means the students see the guidance counselor for direct services typically once a week. And tier 3, again, is they see the, students see the guidance counselor for direct services more than once a week, just to understand, in general terms, what those tiers mean.
Yes, Mrs. Russo?
Is this at all ages or just K through 2? Does every teacher, every grade do this? K to 5?
K5 is elementary.
Thank you.
There are strength,
Where's,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, could you, oh, I see the tier 1+, okay. And what's the difference between the 4 pages in this packet here?
I think the first 3 pages are October, February, and June. So October's
Ah.
purple, February's green, and June is sort of the light orange.
October, I see, got it.
And then the percentages, again, are where the students are sort of falling and how we're identifying. Again, this is to identify students who need support.
So in general terms, on that page that has, yellow, green, blue, red at the top, going
Mhm.
across, typically if we have percentage in strength and typical, we're okay, and if it's in the red, those are the students that typically we would be concerned about, which are, as you would imagine, lower percentages, very low.
Mhm.
Because, again, what we're saying is social emotional learning isn't just an innate ability for all kids. Some kids have to be explicitly taught, and the sooner we can get those lessons and get them identified, the more growth that they'll make. So I think that's what we're looking at. And then the last few pages are just the same data that you've seen, but put into charts. So you'll notice some of the charts have BOY, MOY, EOY, that's beginning of year, middle of year, end of year acronyms. And then it also allows our guidance counselors, when they have conversations across schools, to talk about the behaviors they're seeing, how they're spending their time. But you've also been very supportive of adding those supports for social emotional learning at the elementary level. School psychologists, guidance counselors. We added a guidance counselor this year at Fox Hill. Again, that guidance counselor is providing explicit instruction and direct services to students who we're identifying as needing that. So, and I think that's one of the things that we are going to talk about. So we're going to spend some time talking about MCAS, I think, but what I really wanted to stress tonight is we're doing, I feel like, so much more than the information we're going to see on MCAS. We know our kids well, our teachers know their students incredibly well. We're trying to be as proactive as we can with our curriculum and our instruction and making those adjustments as quickly as we can. And this information in the hand of a talented teacher or guidance counselor and principal, which I believe we have, really manifests itself in student progress. And I think that's what we're looking for.
So I know you're trying to wrap up, but I
Yes.
actually wanted to just ask you, I wanted to follow up on Mrs. Russo's question about the budget, because this is what we talk about every year when we put the budget out, that, when we look at the number of staff for the number of students and why are we doing this? I mean, so to address the social emotional learning needs of our students, you've mentioned tonight guidance counselors and school psychologists. Are there other, and we have a system-wide behavioral specialist, are there other types of interventionists for the social emotional that, it's one of the reasons we have a lot of staff is because we have a lot of need that we're addressing and expliciting providing instruction providers, yeah,
We have a social worker at the elementary, middle, and high school level that we've
Uh-huh.
added.
okay.
So that's for
Right.
sort of larger support.
Right. And that's on top of our classroom teachers who are providing the Tier 1 instruction for social emotional on a daily, minute-by-minute basis, right?
Sure,
Yeah.
right.
Okay. And the other thing is, in terms of the impact on special education identification is, my understanding is that if students are identified as having a weakness in a specific, we go back to the academic areas, but also could affect social emotional, if we can intervene and teach kids the skills, whether it's phonics or whether it's social emotional, how to interact with your classmates, then some of those kids just needed that instruction and that practice, and so they won't need special ed services, and they won't need to have a label on them either. But then when these interventions, if I understand correctly, when these interventions are tried and if they're not working, then we make a referral to do an evaluation to say, the child isn't, we're not meeting this child's needs, what's going on, and then we look at whether there are special needs that need to be addressed. Is that an accurate description?
Yes, absolutely. But again, we're not waiting. So we're not waiting the 6 months to see the failure or the discrepancy grow to the point where that comes into play. And I think you've also seen it manifest itself in something that I call hit rate. So, so when we look at when I sort of 10 years ago, for students that were referred to from the district itself. So again, parents can always refer. I don't want to,
Right.
I'm not talking about that. These are students that are being referred from sort of internal folks. Our hit rate was about 50%. So we were referring twice as many students as we were identifying as having a disability. And that's not very good because we should know the students better than that. So our hit rate currently is for, again, internally referred students, it's virtually 100%. I think it's like 96, 98%, which means that when we're referring Ms. Simons for special ed, we've already tried research-based interventions, we already know that child well, and again, we're not waiting for that discrepancy to get to the point where it's obvious. So our hit rate for parent referrals is lower, but I'm saying I think everyone can refer, and so again, I'm not saying all of our hit rates are better,
Right.
but I think we're seeing our internal hit rates being improved. And in many places, and I wish Massachusetts would move to this, is that you don't even need to do further testing, because if we've identified a lack of progress after sort of 3 different interventions, we should just be able to say that there's a disability instead of doing another round of assessment.
Assessments, okay.
But
Thank you,
that's not where we're at
thank you.
right now.
Does anyone else have any questions on this? I also want to thank you for bringing this up. We don't talk about instruction and curriculum as often as we would like to, and it's really good to have this report and to see the numbers and to hear about what's going on. So really appreciate all the work that all the teachers and staff are doing and all of your efforts, because it also takes a lot of work to put it together, as well as, you know, the weekly and the bi-weekly and the 3 times a year kind of assessments that are being done.
Yeah, and again,
Thank
it just, to end where I start again, Ms. Simon, with gratitude again, the numbers represent just incredible hard work and incredible talent. And you're gonna be seeing other numbers, because they're all gonna be plastered all over the globe, with MCAS scores, and what I'm saying is those, from my perspective, those test scores, I want them to be very good, but they're not necessarily, I think, a good indicator of the level of instruction and that kids are getting in our classrooms. So again, I'm not making excuses there. Even if our MCAS scores were perfect, I would say the same thing. So so we need to look at some other things. And I think
Okay,
the biggest change, I'm sorry, over the last 10 years that we've seen is really that growth in social emotional need, which is really where we've needed the most support in terms of adding staff. And I'm sure you're seeing some of the same things in your classroom as well. And I think we're also trying to keep track of the effectiveness of our social emotional growth in our students
Right.
as well. So Patrick, I
And,
just want
yeah, Mr. Larkin.
No, I was just going to make a quick statement about the release of the 2019 MCAS and accountability scores. So as a district, we were classified as making substantial progress towards our targets. And we'll have, again, during the course, since they were accessible to us, the reports, we've been building some internal folders. We couldn't share things beyond the school level until today. I think actually it was midnight last night, or 12:01 a.m. today. So we have all kinds of reports and things. Again, the initial results, I think, are good. I don't think we're going to see any big surprises. But again, I haven't had a chance to really dig down deeply. I have shared, school-based stuff with individual principals just in the last 24, 48 hours. So probably the next meeting would make the most sense, just because I don't want to push it off, to do a little bit of an overview and some highlights and areas of need from this year's report.
Good, thank you. So are we all set on curriculum and instruction for tonight?
I can do more.
I guess we'll wait till next time
All
when
right,
you report
all
on
right.
the next thing. Okay, yes, please come up.
It's just about, I'm curious how you picked.
If you
what
could
assessments
sit
you
down
used.
and make sure, the microphone's on, I believe, and tell us your name and
I'm
and
Beth
then-
Colburn. I have a child at Pine Glen.
Okay,
I was just
thank you.
curious how you choose which assessments you use to assess your curriculum. Obviously, you pick the curriculum, but who picks the assessments?
Okay,
Let me see, the universal screener, we're using one that we've used for a while that I think we just like, and that's iReady from Curriculum Associates, and we just like the information that we get. And they have a support curriculum that goes with it. So if the teacher has that tool if they need it. So if if the student took the assessment and they were weak in a particular area, the curriculum automatically aligns with that weakness to provide some support. So I think we really like the results of the iReady that we've seen on the reading side. I think we made some changes in the math. We're using Symphony as the universal screener in math. And I just think, honestly, it's through research that we just like the assessment. I think it's aligned. We like the information that we get. And so those would be on the screeners. And the DESA as the screener, we looked at a bunch. This was aligned with CASEL standards, which are the national standards. And also, I thought it aligned well with Responsive Classroom, which was our Tier 1 curriculum. So I think that's kind of why we chose those screeners. The progress monitoring tools that we use, the assessments, are typically aligned with the skill that we're trying to reach. So again, I'm going to butcher this, and I'm sorry, but Diana, I'm looking at you. Lexia, if a student's getting Lexia as an intervention, which would be a reading intervention, there's going to be an assessment tool built into Lexia every 2 weeks that the information we're going to get back. So
it comes from.
it comes from that intervention. And again, if we're going to dibble the kids, and I'm not sure what that stands for either, but that's going to
Dibble.
be looking at a particular skill set that the kids are looking at. And then we had to build some of our own
Yeah.
math progress monitoring tools.
Yeah.
Presented at the National Math Conference with our own internal measures that our teachers created.
So again, the key with all of this is not to wait. So, and I think is really what we want to try to do is we should be seeing growth in all of our kids. Again, obviously at different rates, but I'm saying we're trying to not, for the students who aren't making expected growth, we really want to make sure that we change up what we're doing.
Yeah. And on this first graph, you highlighted ELL and IEP students. You listed the number of students. Were they included in the tiers, or were you just adding those numbers so you had an FYI? Or were they not included in the data of the tiers?
No, they're included.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions on the instruction and curriculum? And so we will now go back to the approval of the minutes of September 10th, and we had a motion but no second.
Second.
Well,
Oh,
you
I
made the
it,
motion.
sorry.
Were you there on September 10th?
I'm sure I was.
Yes, okay. So we have a motion and a second. Are there any comments or questions about it? All those in favor of approving the minutes of September 10th?
Aye.
All those opposed, abstain?
Aye.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye, so that's 3-0-2. Okay, all right. So now I will go back to, I'd like to go to communication, and we'll start with our transportation and building projects. Is that Mr. Cuna or Dr. Conti who's going to speak?
No, I think Bob was gonna, again, we had some projects that were, I think we're in between, so just
Right.
keep you guys informed.
Great.
That's where I wanted to start off, it's with the project update. So there are two projects that at the last meeting I told you I would update you on. One of them hopefully you saw in the practice field out by the student parking lot. So those poles were delivered for the Project Adventure course last week. Project Adventure has been on site since last Tuesday installing. We're expecting them by the end of this week to be completely done. And then our athletics team and our, why am I drawing a blank right now? So Matt Jackling will be outside with them to start assisting on some training and so forth. So again, by the end of this week, I expect to give another report at our next meeting.
Okay.
The second project was our walkie-talkies, and I did tell you that we're gonna move on that pretty slowly. So far, myself and Officer Tom Fornia have rolled those out to the middle school administration team of 3 and the high school administration team of 6. So we're moving slowly in that direction. We're gonna move to some other schools throughout the next week or so.
Bob, when you're distributing them, how are you differentiating each walkie-talkie for an administrator? Is there a number that you're providing?
I'm not providing them, but they are engraved. Each one of the walkie-talkies has a numbering system from 1 through, let's say, 11. And usually the principal would be number 1, and then so forth down in the building.
So the middle school has 3 walkie-talkies now. There'd be walkie-talkie 1, walkie-talkie 2, and walkie-talkie 3?
They do only have 3 right now. So like I said, the 3 administrators there. The principal is number 1, and there are 2 other assistant principals, so they have numbers 2 and 3.
So I'm assuming there's
where's
no correlation between the number and then the status of the person who
Yeah.
receives that walkie-talkie?
We're not trying to delegate any status of people by the number of the walkie-talkie that they get.
Okay, so I shouldn't read anything into Mr. Murphy having walkie-talkie 3 then?
I think Dr. Conti wanted
Yeah,
walkie-talkie number 1. I think
Yeah,
that's what's
that's what
going
it
on.
is. I'm trying to play nice here. So I think Dr. Conti can have number 1 walkie-talkie, is what he wants. No. So again, I think next week we're going to be rolling them out to other building administrations and then be moving further down throughout the system as well too. So even though that the walkie-talkies are engraved with a number on them, they don't have anyone's name specifically, so we can actually assign them as we want. So if we do plan on changing any of the administration positions, we could just pass walkie-talkies out to different people in the future. So those are the 2 big things. I think what everybody really wants to talk about is the buses. I think first what I'd like to do is say that we've taken a lot of information and requests from residents, from principals, from staff here, and we've tried to address as many as possible. So on that note, I want to say that the bus company has been responsive to that and helping us through the first transition, the first month of school. One thing that is not as positive is that we did have some late buses at the high school. As you all know, that the high school is our 3rd tier of buses. So as we do the middle school first, anything that we're late or close to translates into our 2nd tier, which is our elementary 3 schools. Anything that's affecting that tier, of course, translates to our 3rd. First, it was learning the new routes. We did change the routes from last year, so that's part of it. Second is Burlington has a little bit of traffic in the morning, as you're well aware of. And third is needing just to adjust some of the routes and times and so forth. Even up to today, we have buses coming in within 1 to 2 minutes of the bell time, and we need to get that down tighter. We're aware of it, the principal is aware of it, the bus company is aware of it. Right now, I would say that's our biggest gripe. But again, people are aware of it, people are working on it, and we're trying to make minimal adjustments. I think we're pretty close, but we need to get closer. We need to gain 3 to 4 minutes on 3 buses to be in an ideal situation. So, I did have a meeting this morning on the phone with the company, and like I said, they're definitely responsive to it. We have made a few changes already, so I do want to thank them on that. But they also know that right now, that's the one thing that's not making this school, and I'm sure you all as well, not happy about students being either close to late or actually late. So, like I said, I will update you on that and see how that goes, but I think there's some positiveness coming from the decisions that are being made on their team. And what else?
No, just, again, just because it's going to be connected to a larger conversation, and I don't have enough data to share, but I think what we're seeing, and again, I feel like been here long enough, the bus routes, the residential part of Burlington, I think, used to be very self-contained. And what we're seeing now with, even if we're not seeing a whole lot of students, we're seeing more apartments and residential areas that are being interspersed into other parts of town, into the commercial areas. And so we're needing to get a little bit creative, because for us to run a bus across town into a commercial area to pick up 1 or 2 kids, it's not about having room on the bus, it's about the time it takes to get the bus across town and then back, where we didn't used to have to do that before. So again, I don't want to blame any particular development, but as you see them go up, even if there aren't a significant number of kids, even if there's a couple kids that we have to go pick up, it's we have to respond to that. So and so we're seeing more kids from a greater disbursement across town, I guess is what I'm trying to say poorly. And it's just something we have to be careful about. And that's corporate drive, I mean, that's all over the place. So, and it may be that we need to rethink some of those routes or work with the bus company to try to figure that out.
Yes, Mrs. Monaco?
Like the Third Ave area, there's another 300 apartments probably going in there.
And again, I don't want to take a position on the project, and I'm saying, obviously, if there are students there, children there, we're going to educate them. All I'm saying is, I think in the model of busing that people are used to, we weren't running school buses over to that part of town. So even if it's a couple kids, getting there and back is going to add time.
Maybe a minibus or something.
Or something, but I'm saying, I think we just have to think about things a little bit differently if we're going to have to pick up students over sort of the 128 barrier.
Martha?
Yes.
If I could just take a minute. I don't know if this had to do with busing or not, but I should have thought of this when you asked about announcements. It's really not an announcement, but 2 or 3 weeks ago, I got a phone message from someone, a woman, a parent, and her voice was so soft that I couldn't catch her name or her phone number. So I don't know why she called me, and I was unable to call her back. So if she happens to be listening, call me again and leave a louder message, please.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Yes, Mrs. Russo?
The 3 or 4 buses that are running late, are they buses from other areas of town that are geographically far away?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so that's,
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I guess I hear that people are trying and that there's been some change and improvement, and I'm glad to hear that, and you have a real positive attitude. I also want to say that having students arrive to school late is not acceptable, and I don't think anyone is saying otherwise, but I want to make it clear that that's not acceptable for students to arrive late to school, so those who are in charge of this need to keep working on it until we get a solution where all the students are coming to school on time. Okay? Yes, Mrs. Russo.
sorry, my brain's working slow tonight with the questions. So these 3 or 4 buses in these areas that are farther away, were they also in the bus routes last year?
So 2 clarifications. When I say 3 to 4 buses, Depending on the day, depending on any traffic or whatnot. Some buses are on time, some buses are not. Tomorrow, that could change a little bit. The first couple of days, we were talking upwards of 10 to
Yes.
15 minutes. Now we're talking being on time by 3 minutes positive to being one window, 1 minute plus or minus there. So we're not showing the 15 minutes late. Two of the buses we are seeing that are new stops that are different throughout the town that
Okay.
were added this year.
Okay.
One of the buses that had a stop last year, there was a special accommodation made in that part of town to remove them off the regular buses and have an additional bus that was going in that area pick them up.
Okay.
So again, like that accommodation is something that we're looking at right now as well too. So, again, they're not
Okay.
new problems specifically to this year, just that the routes are changing. Because you know that every single year, obviously, the routes are looked at just because of the population changes. So these particular 4 buses are just fluctuating daily. And again, the traffic on Middlesex Turnpike caused by the construction, and then on Cambridge Street today did not help, because I did follow 3 different bus routes. And I could tell that they were gonna be off a few minutes just because of the traffic during construction. So we know that once we get to snow times and stuff like that, that's not gonna help us either. So we really just need to pick up 3 to 5 minutes on these particular bus runs, really to just give us a safer window.
Thank
Other
you.
Comments? Do we need to start some of the bus routes earlier? Is that one of the things that you look at?
It's not that we really have that option,
Oh, because
because
of
it's
the middle
third
school.
tier.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Right.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
middle school to high school.
Well,
Yep,
it's middle
got
school,
it.
the 3 elementaries,
Yep.
and then the high school.
Right, and that's the group that's, as they move through, yeah.
Other comments or questions about transportation? Okay. So the next item is the remote participation policy that the Board of Selectmen have did approve in August, on the 12th of August, which is applicable to all local public bodies in the town of Burlington that are multi-member. Has everyone on this committee had a chance to look it over?
I didn't get it.
Okay. It wasn't sent in the packet, it was sent previously. I can give you this copy, but the Board of Selectmen has voted to allow remote participation in public meetings under certain conditions. And in particular, the minimum requirements for this is that, well, they put it in the negative. No member of a town board shall remotely participate unless the following requirements are met. So the members of the town board who participate remotely and all persons present at the meeting must be clearly audible to each other. A quorum of the town board, including the chair or the person authorized to chair the meeting, must be physically present at the meeting location. And that, I feel like that's an important one, because the remote participation cannot be a way to get a quorum. And members who participate remotely may vote and shall not be deemed absent. They list permissible reasons for remote participation, which are personal illness, personal disability, emergency, military service, or geographic distance. And they explain what technology would be needed and what procedures would be involved. It's not clear to me if we need to take a vote on it. I think it's good, because since a quorum of the body must be present in order to allow this to happen, to me, what it allows is if, say, at a meeting, somebody gets sick that day, but they want to participate in the conversation on a certain topic, they would be able to join the meeting remotely to participate in that conversation. So I'd like to get other people's comments before I ask Mr. Cuna if he can be in charge of setting up the technology so it would meet the requirements of this. So yes, here, you can look through it if you want.
I
Mrs. Russo.
personally like the idea. There's been many times where there's been a sick child at home. I'm perfectly capable of attending the meeting, but I'm not physically able to. So, you know, taking care of family members or things of that nature, I do see this as being helpful. And like you, I definitely agree about not using it to make the quorum, so you still have the physical presence of the board. So I'm, for many different reasons that have come up over the years, I definitely am in favor of it, and like the different subcategories, I guess, of how it's been set up.
Okay. Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, just a little history. I think the reason the selectmen came up with this policy is because many, many years ago, and still up to this day, planning boards are typically working on projects, and the meetings are continued 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if a planning board member misses a meeting, they couldn't vote.
Oh, that's right.
And then they couldn't get a majority of the planning board to approve these projects. And there was a situation where a planning board member had watched the meeting remotely, and I think he called in a vote, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and they said, no, you can't do that. You don't have policies in places and things like that. So I think it's important for boards that have to vote on projects and they have multiple meetings to have something like this in place. I'm not sure we need it as much as the planning board and maybe the Board of Appeals and projects that might involve, you know, millions of dollars worth of development. And planning board members can't always make all of those meetings. So it's very important, I think, to have a policy like this in place. I think it might come in handy for our committee here and there. And I'm grateful that they passed it. There might be opportunities for us to take advantage of it. But I think the primary thrust of it was because they wanted to make sure that projects didn't get derailed because a planning board member missed one meeting. So.
Mrs. Monaco?
I'm in favor of it. I think it should be voted on at a subsequent meeting, and maybe it could just be an agenda item for a vote.
Okay.
And Bobby could tell us about the technology at the time.
Mr. Murphy?
I agree with Steve. I think his point is well taken. I think that was the impetus behind the whole idea. And I also agree with him that the type of things that we typically discuss and ultimately vote on don't necessarily fall into that category. However, to me, there's no harm in if somebody has a good excuse that they can't make it, they want to do this. I guess my only concern would be that I don't want this to be an obligation, that if you're not there, then you have to somehow make yourself available, because whatever reason that came up that doesn't allow you to be there might also not allow you to be participating. So I think if we want to have it as a policy, as an option to somebody who wasn't able to make it to the meeting, that's fine. I just don't want to make it some sort of a mandatory situation. But other than that, I don't see a problem with it.
Well, the way I read it, it's not a required thing. And it's not clear to me that we need to vote on it, but I certainly wouldn't want to vote on it tonight, especially since you hadn't had a chance to look at it. So maybe we could put it on the agenda for the next meeting. And if Mr. Cuna can let us know generally how we would set it up so it meets all the requirements. And then if we feel we need to vote on it, we can vote on it at the next meeting. Does that sound good? Okay.
Well, if it's going to be a policy of ours, then we have to vote on it.
Okay, yep, so that's fine. Okay, all right.
You could just write that.
Good question.
Okay.
Walkie-talkie one not included.
All right. So, and now moving on to old business. There's two things I wanted to make a statement about. One is that the topic is the elementary school building needs discussion that we have on the agenda this point each meeting. And serendipitously, BCAT is interested in having a long segment about the buildings, the school buildings in town, both the state of them, the history, and also what we are looking at needing going forward. And so Dr. Conti and Mr. Cuna are going to be interviewed, and Ms. Monaco generously volunteered, unless she convinces Mr. Murphy to join me, being interviewed sometime that would hopefully be, they're hoping to air it in October. So there will be an opportunity for some more history and discussion. And I think it's a good time because, well, actually, I'll put that aside. The other thing is that I know that the newspapers and various media are trying to report on our conversations about the elementary school buildings, but there's been some confusion in what I've been reading. And I just wanted to clarify that where we are now with the elementary school building needs is that we are in an ongoing process to figure out what we will put into the Massachusetts School Building Authority as a request for financial aid to help us with future building needs. And we've identified that it needs to be some kind of elementary school project. And so we need to figure out what that project might look like. So far, we've had some conversations about I think it's 5 various types of projects. And at one of our meetings, I think it was 2 ago, we decided that at this point we did not want to pursue the possibility of having a 5th grade academy and the other schools going to K-4. We also said that we would put together a resource on the website, and that's up now. It's under the district menu. Right now, it's got a button for the survey, but we haven't put the survey up yet. So if you go to that, it's not that we're not gonna, and it's not that it's finished. And so what I'd like us to talk about, and I think unless someone has another topic, is I feel like it's time to have more community input into the discussion. And so what types of ways do we want to pursue at this point for community input? And there's already a survey button, although not a survey on the website. There is a survey. Oh, there is a survey. When I went on it yesterday, it said it was closed or something, or unavailable. Okay, so there is a survey on the website, on the Burlington Public Schools website under the district section. There's a category for the elementary school building discussion. And I'm interested in hearing from people what other formats and ways that they would like to invite community participation. So, yes, Mr. Murphy.
I know in years past, before we had computers and stuff, I guess.
Sketches.
After sketches. We used to, I think with several times that we've gone through this over the years, we'd pick a night at each of the elementary schools to meet with their PTO and anybody else who might want to come. And we'd kind of split it up among school committee members. We'd each kind of take a building or whatever. Under the bring the mountain to Mohammed type of a thing. Mm-hmm. And you know, sometimes you get a few people, sometimes you wouldn't, but I think the feeling was it's easier to do it in a setting that they're used to and where they typically go in that once a month PTO meeting, whatever, anyway. So that would be one way, coordinating with PTO meetings, and they can put it on their agenda and go that, as opposed to having a big night at the high school auditorium where some people can show up and some people won't.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other ideas? Yes, Mrs. Monaco?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're ready for what Tom suggested. It seems to me we've done that more when we have a plan.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we should sort of reach out maybe with a little bit of online publicity as far as asking people. But it doesn't seem to me there's a whole lot to decide either. We pretty much have concluded in prior meetings that we're looking at keeping the model we have. Unless I misunderstood that.
Well, maybe we should have that conversation, because
Well-
I didn't think we had made that decision. I had heard some preferences in that way.
All right, well, preferences that we keep the model. On the off chance that we get approved for the high school this year, I won't hold my breath, then this discussion is premature anyway, because we can't do them all at once. But I wonder if we should have I suppose we'd have to get it funded. we're looking at Pine Glen and Fox Hill and trying to figure out what to do with the two buildings. Should we make two buildings at Fox Hill? Should we fix Pine Glen where it is? Should we then fix Fox Hill or switch them in the other order? And I wonder if, among ourselves, we should come to some sort of conclusion and then maybe get some architectural input as to what's possible and what isn't possible. That would be my approach, rather than having a lot of discussion before we've figured out what we want to discuss.
Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, I agree with Chris. That's the big elephant in the room. Do we build one big elementary school, or do we build two? One of my concerns is it's so difficult to get the state to approve one project, let alone two, that if we decide to build a modest-sized elementary school at the Fox Hill, it'll be 25 years before we get state approval to build another building over at the Pine Glen.
True.
So I think that we need to decide whether we want to break the model a little bit and build a larger school. And I know there's a lot of sentiment on this committee not to build a larger school, and I know Eric is not in favor of building a larger school.
It's huge.
But I don't think we're gonna be able to solve our long-term needs by hoping to get approval for two schools. The cost of building schools has skyrocketed in the last several years. I remember there was a big uproar in Woburn when they were building a $70 million high school, and that's a drop in the bucket now. They're going for $250 if you're lucky. So if we try to do one school at the Fox Hill and then 10 years later do another school at Pine Glen, that Pine Glen school could cost $500 million the way things are going. So I think we need to we need to come up with a decision which way we want to go. And I know we had some discussion about maybe organizing a building committee and getting some input. That's what we did years ago. I remember that's before I got on the school committee, I was on a building committee to decide whether we were gonna reopen the Francis Wyman, do something with the Meadowbrook School, build another school, and I think there were about 15 people on the building committee, and we met with architects and different people, and we came up with a recommendation to take back the Francis Wyman and not to do some of the other things that people were debating, and then that recommendation was debated by this committee before I was on it, and they agreed that made sense. But by having a building committee, you get the buy-in from the community on the decision. It's not just a school committee saying we want to do one thing. We had people from the Board of Selectmen and Ways and Means and some town meeting members, and we all debated, the pros and cons of different options and made a recommendation to the school committee after a vote. We had public meetings, we had presentations by the architects. I think the architects showed us configurations for reopening the Meadowbrook School and what it would look like, and then what it would cost to take the Francis Wyman back. It used to be a middle school, and then we were leasing it out to, was it Northeastern Town?
Middlesex.
Middlesex. And I thought that was very helpful to the school committee, and the subcommittee did a lot of work. And they made a recommendation, and I think that it gave an opportunity to most of the people in town to attend the meetings and have input, rather than just have us make that decision before we get input from other, what they call them, stakeholders. So it's one way to do it. I'm not saying it's the way we should do it, but it's something I think we should think about as a possible way of gaining momentum towards whatever decision we make. Because if we have a committee and the committee says that's a terrible idea, building one big school, then we've got a nice basis for whatever decision we're gonna make.
Mrs. Russo?
I guess I also would like to maybe have the financial department weigh in, town accountant, because if we do get denied by the high school, there's still projects here that need to be
Yes.
taken care of, and they're pretty substantial. So I guess, it's kind of a moving flow chart. If we do the high school, then do we have funding for the Pine Glen smaller school to get done sooner rather than a larger Fox Hill? I guess I'd like to see the financial layout of the if-thens. You know, if we do get approved for Fox Hill, does that negate Pine Glen or the high school? I guess I'd like to also have that discussion, see how those lay out, and then, you know, depending on what the board decides moving forward, one big school or two smaller schools, we still have that high school project that's going to require funding, and then how can we best go from there, maximize our dollars, and, you know, move with the community's input too. So I don't know if we've had any discussion about the debt schedule and putting that through.
Okay. Mrs. Monaco?
We did have one discussion. It was a meeting we had in the conference room with, some sort of a subcommittee several months ago. And Paul Sagarino was involved in it and was giving us some input on what the funding looked like going out in the future. But you're right, we need to do that again. We need to, we're sort of going in circles though.
Right,
And
right.
I don't really agree with Steve on the building committee, because I don't think we have any old schools to take back or decisions of that magnitude to make. I think we have a basic decision, which is, according to what Eric told us, if we were to put all the kids in one new school at Fox Hill, it would be 1,100 kids. It'd be over 1,000 kids in one building. So I don't know if you can build a building that has two halves and have one school in one half and one school in the other half. But I think what we have to decide is whether the Pine Glen site can be maintained as a school. And that isn't up to us. We have to have people help us with that decision. Engineering firm, architectural firm, I don't know what, but you guys would know what. And it would probably require maybe an addition to Pine Glen as well as a renovation of Pine Glen, or I don't know. That's where we need architectural help. But we have two buildings. We have Fox Hill and we have Pine Glen, and they both need our attention, and we need to focus, I believe, on those two, either combining them into something, preferably two different buildings on the Fox Hill site, or leave the Fox Hill site with one building and another at Pine Glen. But I'm not sure that we can make that decision without some further input from outside resources.
Okay. Mr. Murphy?
Following up on that, we did have a master plan done a couple of years ago, is that Kevin Buckley's firm?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it would make sense going back to them, because they have all the background information and they're familiar with the situation, as opposed to bringing a new firm on and they have to start from ground zero. But I think Chris is correct. We don't have a plethora of options. We got a couple, and in rough numbers, an architect can certainly price it out a bit. I think Kristen's point was a good one, that if whatever we get, we're not gonna get something else for a while. And maybe the architect has some insight on whether the state would consider it to be one project if we were to do a larger building cut in half, as Chris says, call it Building A and Building B, and they're essentially going to be two schools on one site, but can we do that in such a way that it counts as one project? And maybe the architect with some experience with the state has seen that before, or knows that doesn't work, I don't know. But I think, we've been having these discussions, and we kick the can down and come back, kick around a little bit more, so I think we gotta start taking some positive steps. I think we're gonna need some money, obviously, if we're gonna bring in an architect to come up with some specific options based on his master plan. And I'm not sure how we'll do that. Obviously, we just missed town meeting for this time, so we might have to wait to the January town meeting. In the meantime, we can kind of get ducks in order as to what we're gonna wanna hire this outfit to do.
I'm sorry, it just occurred to me that if you could speak more into your microphone so that somebody who might want to take minutes later, I know I couldn't get that cord to go any farther, but
Okay.
just so there's
Yes.
more clarity. Thank
Yes, I
you.
apologize. No, I just think we gotta start moving forward. And if the fifth grade school is not an option, it's not an option. So to me, we're down to building two new schools or one big school. And if we're gonna build two new schools, and we can do it in such a way that they're on the same site, will that be counted as one project for the state? And so we only have to go for funding one time.
Okay. Yes, Mr.
Yeah, I
Nelson?
was just thinking maybe we could invite Mr. Buckley to come to our next meeting, have some conversations with him.
Yeah?
I mean, if he wants to charge us a consulting fee, can we do that without, it doesn't have to go out to bid, it's only right?
He did the master plan.
I may be misspoken by saying this, but I don't believe Mr. Buckley's firm is still the same firm that it was prior to, so I would have to reach out to him,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Yeah.
for confirmation.
Oh, okay.
And again, I hope I'm not
Yeah,
saying something
Maybe you
that's
could talk to him.
misinformation,
Now
but,
that you said
because
that,
he authored the
you're right.
report, maybe,
Yep.
yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
I didn't know that.
His
Yeah.
grandkids, yeah.
Well,
Well, maybe we have
I-
to put it out to bid and get a warrant article in January.
So I actually I would like to move forward with community input. I don't think it's too soon. It is now the end of September, and in order to put in a new proposal in April, we would have to make a decision by the end of this year of what kind of proposal we want to put in. And I would like to move forward on both ways. And one is to have Dr. Conti and Mr. Cunha look into how would we get that consultant input that you folks, the financial, and from the town, what are the financial requirements and needs, what are the architectural and engineering needs, but also to start having some community input. And, it would take a while to set up, so if we got people's, if we heard from people that nobody wanted to keep the building at Fox Hill and at Pine Glen, then it might influence our decision. I'm not as much in favor of a separate committee, because I think that we all want to be involved in all these parts of it. So I'd like to move forward on both counts, both having meetings like, I like your idea, Mr. Murphy, that we meet in individual schools as a way for people, and then, if we had a meeting at Fox Hill and somebody couldn't make it, they could go to the one at Francis Wyman if it was a better night for them, to get ideas, to make sure the survey is open and maybe take a look at what we're asking on the survey. And of course, people are invited. We have this conversation on our agenda at each meeting. If people have ideas that they want to comment on, they could talk at our meetings also as we have this conversation. So what do people think of that idea of going forward in both directions? Yeah.
How about a compromise where we publicize a discussion for the public like the way we do a public hearing?
Mm-hmm.
Ask people to come and give us their input rather
Mhm.
than, I don't mind going to the schools, but I don't know what we're gonna tell them.
Mhm.
Oh, well, we don't know what we're gonna do, what do you think?
Mhm.
It doesn't make sense to me
Yeah, that's a good point.
until we know what
Okay.
we're gonna do. But if people wanna come and tell us, in a part of our meeting, we're gonna set
Mhm.
aside, 30, 40 minutes if someone, and we publicized it somehow.
Or just publicize the
Survey.
survey, which, a lot of people probably don't even know about, but if
Mhm.
we could send something home with the kids or something, just to let them know that, so the parents know that that's out there.
So
What's
I-
on the survey?
so-
What does it
Yeah.
ask?
Just a couple questions, just a comment to Mr. Murphy's point is, when we were discussing changing the high school start time, remember, no one really engaged until we actually put out a real schedule for them to respond to.
Yeah.
So even though, Ms. Simon, it was on every agenda, you remember, we had every conversation, and no one thought it was real until we put out a schedule. So I think even if you're asking for input, I think you'll get some, but I think honestly, if you make a decision to build 2 schools at Fox Hill, that's when you'll get the people will want input at that time. And I just have a firm belief that enrollment pressure is a sort of high priority for the MSBA. And Fox Hill is a school where we currently have modulars in use. So I do think we have a stronger argument for enrollment pressure where we have existing modulars as opposed to adding modulars at some of the other schools. But again, if it's going to take 10 or 15 years, it may be something that we also have to consider is some interim steps too. So that's something that's possible. And just as a sort of very quick aside is there's a pending House and Senate bill that is going to increase state funding both for schools through Chapter 70, but they're also raised the cap on MSBA from $600 million a year to $750 million a year. So I think they're going to
One more high school.
increase 150 million. But again, to Mr. Nelson's point, that's one school now at this point. So, but I'm saying it's better than going the other direction. So I think there may be more state funding available for more school projects.
It is my understanding, though, that the elementary projects are not typically as expensive as the high school ones. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And what was the estimate we were looking at to replace, say, one Fox Hill with a somewhat larger school? Did we have an estimate on that?
No.
Okay.
No, but again, we're not going to get out for under $50 million. So I'm
Okay,
just
but we're
saying.
not talking 150 million. We're
Correct.
be-
So the
yeah.
Billerica High School, I think, just opened was, 187 million, and that was.
170, I think, yeah.
Right. so
But
right
if we're
around
putting
there.
2 buildings for 2 schools into one
What are
project.
those 2 buildings?
Well, then it would, probably be
And
more.
it would be, it would be
Oh, it's-
more than that, so.
Could you reach out, or Bob reach out to Kevin and
Yeah.
see if he's,
And again, I'll even call Jack McCarthy at MSBA. He's a great resource. He's very helpful.
Great idea.
And maybe get his input as well. So just because we're sort of in between on a bunch of different things. And as you all know, getting the high school project supported doesn't eliminate the need at the elementary school, or not getting the high school supported and shifting our attention to the elementary schools doesn't eliminate the need at the
Yeah,
high
right.
school either.
Yeah.
We really have sort of 3 of the 6 buildings are sort of functioning well, and 3 of the 6 buildings need significant attention, so.
And one
Yes,
other
Mr.
thing, if I
Murphy?
may, as Chris said, we did have a kind of a brief discussion on this a few months ago, and I forget why we're all together, but Paul was there. And the town does have a chunk of money set aside in the bond schedule for a school project. When it was first put there, that's when we were proceeding with the high school, so that's kind of what it was for. Theoretically, it could be used for an elementary project, but it's only, I believe, I don't know the exact number, but it's only enough for one project. So part of the discussions going forward is going to have to be with the town about how we get 3 schools into a one canned school. And that's going to have to be an ongoing conversation, because as we've talked before, if we don't get the high school funding from the state, there are some things that we're going to have to do on our own. And those would have to be bonded as well, so. So, that's going to have to be a conversation that we're going to continue to have with the town.
Right. So it sounds like we are looking for financial information about the different costs of replacing Fox Hill and Pine Glen as 2 separate schools on 2 separate sites, the cost of replacing Fox Hill and Pine Glen as 2 separate schools on one site, whether it's in 2 separate buildings or if we call it one building, and the cost of building 1,000-student elementary school. Is that, I mean, it sounds like we haven't made a decision between those three. So we would like to know what the financial repercussions are, or impacts of those are.
Yeah, and
Is that-
I think a lot of that information is very formulaic, because the MSBA will have number of square feet per elementary school, per size of elementary school, and we can look at what the price per square foot has been on all the new elementaries and new,
Yeah.
schools that have been built. So, I think we can provide you some of that rough estimate, and then add some escalators as the years go out, so.
So maybe could you
Yeah.
get that for us? Okay.
Absolutely.
And then we also are wanting to, let's see, it sounded like we were in agreement that we wanted to perhaps invite the public to a discussion with us, not at separate buildings. How do people feel about, I know we had different ideas put out.
I'm fine with that. From a
Is
logistics
that-
standpoint, that's easier for us, certainly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So is everyone comfortable with
And-
that?
And
Go
Chris
ahead.
has a good point, we're gonna go there and we don't really have much to tell them.
Mhm.
Before when we did it, it was an informational thing, because we had a
Mhm.
plan and we were filling them in on what the plan was. It wasn't,
Okay, and,
so I would prefer option A, I think, having an informational thing here or a discussion here and advertise it as such.
here,
I
and,
I still think the best way to try to get a large
Mhm.
participation is through the thing online.
and the survey.
Could we start with the survey and see if we get much response?
Sure, we can
Okay.
advertise that and talk
So-
about it
We
at
can
our.
just email it to all the elementary parents.
We can do that.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
idea.
Okay,
Um,
okay, so we're gonna email the survey to
Do
all.
you want to
the-
take a look at the survey, or quickly
Yes.
discuss the 4 questions that are on there, because that can be modified pretty
Mhm.
quickly.
Okay,
The current survey with 1 response, probably somebody in the audience. Which option do you prefer? Our current 4-school, 4-site configuration, maintain a 4-school configuration but build 2 elementary schools on the Fox Hill site with shared common space, create a 3-school elementary configuration with a large Fox Hill similar to Francis Wyman size, and give up Pine Glen. Pine Glen converted to a pre-KK early childhood center, 3 elementary schools configured for grades 1 through 5.
okay, I have a concern because we're not talking about a school the size of Francis Wyman. We're talking about a school that's twice the size of Francis Wyman. Francis Wyman has 525 students, I believe, and Fox Hill now has 400, and Pine Glen has 375. So, I mean, we're talking about a school that's, and we need to have room for
Mhm.
enrollment growth. So we're talking about a school with at least 800 students, so I would not compare that with Francis Wyman. I think we should say a school with approximately 800, or some number that you think is more appropriate.
1,000.
1,000,
It's not gonna be 1,000.
800
Well, I
or
thought-
more.
1,000.
We could say 800 or
Stay
more.
with 1,000.
Yeah, double Francis Wyman would be 1,000, but
There's 500 at Fox Hill.
yes.
No, this-
No,
Yes,
there's
500.
400 at
Aren't there
Fox.
500 at Fox
No, the
Hill?
last,
no.
go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to add it. Francis Wyman and the middle school are both approximately 120,000 square feet of square footage inside.
That's
so-
square footage.
Square footage. So if you look at the middle school and their enrollment, then you look at Francis
Oh,
Wyman.
so you're talking
So,
about
of square
footage.
footage.
Okay, but we're talking about numbers of students. I see, so
We're saying
that's
the
where
size
that.
of the building would be approximately
Okay.
like one of those 2 buildings, if we were talking about 1,000, give or take, students in there.
Okay, then I think we need to be explicit. The physical size, but I don't think that's I don't know if
Well,
that's important.
it's a
But
building
the number of
for
students.
so many
Yeah,
kids.
I think it's more
Right.
important to say how many students we're looking at.
And it's a combination of both
It's
Fox
about
Hill and Pine
760
Glen.
right now,
Okay.
760.
So currently with Pine Glen and Fox Hill, we have about 767 or something. So it's
Thought it was
already
more.
almost 800. And we are looking at, and there's pressure at Francis Wyman. We've talked about where would we fit another student, and there's pressure at Memorial already. So I do think we need to plan, if we were to build one building, we need to plan for more than 800 students. So, you know, what, Dr. Conti, do you want to weigh in on what what you imagine the size of one school would be, appropriate
Well,
number of
again,
students?
we did our enrollment projection.
Yeah.
They're projecting a 10% growth over the next 10 years. So,
1,000.
so we're 3,600
Yeah.
kids, so about another 360 kids.
Mhm.
You figure we have about 1,800 elementary kids, so about another 180 kids. So we're getting
Okay.
close to round numbers. I think
Yeah.
sort of 950. I mean,
Okay.
1,000. I mean, we're right there.
Okay. So can you modify that question, Mr. Larkin, so that it addresses this number of students? Is that, good, okay.
Do we need a number, or do we just want to take out similar to Francis Wyman size? Because we're still talking about create a 3-school elementary configuration with a large Fox Hill.
I'd like to be more specific, because Francis Wyman's a large school, and I'm not sure I'd be opposed to a new school that was 525 students, but I am opposed to a school that's going to be 900 to 1,000 students, and I'd like parents to have that opportunity to know that that's what they would be saying they
Okay.
agree with. And I'm speaking, but I want to make sure other people have a chance to say if they have.
May I
yeah,
just contribute
Dr.
just one
Conti.
thing, and Patrick, if it's simple enough to change, if you could add a question just about class size, because I think that's important. If parents support the sort of school committee's general rule of class sizes of about 20, because that's the difference in, I mean, Francis Wyman, we could probably have 750 kids at Francis Wyman if you all allowed to have 28, 30 kids a class. So, I mean, it's about, not just about classrooms, it's about how many kids you want in the classrooms too, so. I
Would
think
you,
if people want small class sizes, then that's gonna impact the size of the building.
would you be willing to kind of figure out how to word that so it's clear what the connection is?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'll do my best.
All right, so in terms of next community input, we are going to publicize with elementary parents through an email about the survey, and are there other ways to get other input other than if the other people in the community wanted to have input?
Again, Patrick does a great job on Facebook
Okay.
and everywhere else, so we'll
Great.
get it out and see how we do. And I honestly think you'll get the vast majority of your input after you make a decision.
Okay, that's fine. And then maybe, and then we're gonna also get, you're gonna get us financial information.
Uh-huh.
Before we have the public invitation for an informational session at our school committee meeting, do people want to wait until we have more of the financial information and the engineering? So then the third thing would be to get the engineering, structural, architectural needs,
We're
is
gonna
that?
have to go to town meeting for money for most of that, but we should have a discussion, if Kevin's available, since he did the master plan, to talk about just basic information.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll have to go to town meeting with a warrant article to
Mhm.
fund going forward.
All right, so, Dr. Conti, are you clear about
Yes.
where we are?
Yes.
Do we have other
Sure, let's go
things? And, okay, so we'll move forward with that, that's good, thank you. All right, so, now, the next issue is the support services policies, which Mrs. Monaco and I have been a subcommittee to begin to look at the school committee policy manual. And we looked at section E, which happens to be called support services, even though it's pretty wide-ranging. And I gave people an outline where we have 3 current policies under that list. The MASC has a template of about 15 different policies, not all of which seem to Mrs. Monaco and I to be needed, but we have 3 that are currently in our book, and there are 4 that we wanted to discuss with the committee tonight. So if we start with our current plans, the emergency plans, there's a statement where we have emergency plans And we thought it would be good to add, is it fire, civil emergencies, and I didn't have the current one right in front of me.
Critical.
And currently it says fire, civil emergencies, and natural disasters. And we would like to suggest that we change that to say, in case of fire, critical incidents, emergency situations, as well as natural and human-made disasters. And I partly got that wording. I spoke to Chief Kent and Lieutenant Mills to see what they felt would be an encompassing language. We are also not calling this a first reading, so we can put together a draft of it and we can look at it again. But is that something that folks want to comment on or say they would like?
Sounds reasonable.
All right, so yes, we want to reword that. And so maybe hopefully at the next meeting, we can have this all written out so people can look at it specifically. And regarding emergency plans, our current policy does ask us to have updated plans for any new construction. So I wanted to ask either Mr. Kuhn or Dr. Conti if we could check, you could check for us that we do have, that our emergency plans have been updated for Marshall Simons and Memorial since the new construction. And there's a little bit of additional language that I thought might be helpful to just change from our current policy to the updated template, which has to do with the superintendent would submitting every 3 years. Ours currently says that by September 1st, and that we might change that to add who we're going to submit the plans to, like the police, the fire, and the DESI, and when, not just on September 1st, but when changes occur, but at least once a year, and to annually review the response sequence with our local police and fire officials. I think we're doing a lot of that, but to update our policy to say those things. Does that seem like something we want to look at if we put it together and you can read it? Yeah, Mrs. Monaco.
I think every year is not reasonable. This says plans shall be submitted at least every 3 years.
Yeah.
And I would leave it at that because we just can't have people chasing paper
Okay.
so much.
All right. All right.
I agree with Chris.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to say then, or when, every 3 years, or when changes occur?
That's fine.
That sound good? All right. All right, so I will add those to the emergency plans. Any other comments on the emergency plans policy? I'm trying to move this through, so if people have other comments, make sure you get my attention, okay? So the next one is the motor vehicle idling on school grounds, and we just voted a new one. Our question, Mrs. Monaco and I, is sort of, are we enforcing our motor vehicle idling? I know we put up signs about 3 years ago to tell people driving up that they're not supposed to idle. Is it actually posted at all the buildings? Okay, thank you, Mr. Cuna. And it is part of the bus company's contract. I remember reading it in the bus specs. So the bus company and the bus driver are supposed to understand and know that. And perhaps maybe, Mrs. Monaco and I were thinking maybe, Dr. Conti, you could remind the parents, especially where the weather is decent now. The idling policy does have exceptions for extreme hot weather or extreme cold weather that people need to turn their engines on. But maybe we could remind parents when they're waiting to pick up their children or that they could please, turn off the engines. And then when the line starts moving, that's when it would be appropriate to turn it on. So, yes, Mrs.
So
Monaco.
basically on that policy, there's no change. We just wanted to check on
Yeah.
whether it's being enforced and if the signs are up and readable.
All right, so we're not recommending any changes in the policy. And I also just want to add that I'm glad the town is beginning to look at these issues as well, and appreciate that. All right, moving on to the next one that we do have is a meal charge policy. And there's a statement in there that the, I forget how it's worded, but the cafeteria department will be.
I have it right
Oh,
here.
okay, why don't you read it? The self-supporting sentence.
It says, however, unpaid meal charges place a large financial burden on the school district, as food services is a self-supporting entity within the district. Martha has an issue with the policy saying self-supporting, and she would prefer that it say primarily self-supporting. I don't really care. I think it's a hair splitter, but.
Okay, I feel like the reason I think it's important is because we are adding out of our operating budget and other sources sometimes, we are supporting it is not currently self-supporting, and we've made decisions based on adding to their revenues or their income. So that's why I think it's important. So that's the one change that we were recommending. This meal charge policy we had just put in last year, so it's relatively new.
Maybe we should give Eric a day or two to think about that language and see if there's a reason to have it one way or the other.
I can mull.
Mull, okay,
Good at mulling?
I'm good at mulling.
okay.
But, again, I understand both points, but we do, if we do make changes in cafeteria, I think having primarily there allows us to provide some protection for the cafeteria in terms of
Are you done mulling?
overspending, yeah.
So you want to put primarily
I
in?
do.
Okay,
That's fine with me.
then we'll put that in for the
All right.
first reading.
So we'll put that in. I had written a note to the committee members to be sure that we coordinate it with the new collection policy that we'll be discussing later, that Ms. Kasha's proposed, but it turns out that the collection policy she's talking about is totally separate category, so we're not gonna worry about that, okay? All right.
I have a note here
Yeah.
that asks Bob
Ah.
for the plan that has been submitted to the state that Kristen pulled up online for pest management.
Okay, that's the next one.
Okay, so.
That's the next one. So that's the end of the three policies that we have now.
Yes.
So there are two that we're gonna bring back for a first reading.
Right.
Okay. So now, under the category of the policies in this list that we would want to consider adopting, one of them is the pest management policy. And we do not have a specific policy, but we follow state law. And the state law is very extensive, and there's a whole website on it. And so what as Mrs. Monaco, you want to now ask Bob about that, or you want me to?
I think it's more of a question for the committee. If Bob gives us the information that has been submitted to the state, that is the plan that's registered online, do we want it in the form of a policy, or do we want to just leave it the way it is, which is not a policy? And I don't know the answer.
Again, people have to think about it, but I guess, so I'd like to suggest if Bob could get the copy of our plan that's filed with the state, as we have to by law, and then we'll look at that, and then we could decide at our next meeting if we want to have a policy or leave it the way it is, because we have a plan that is being filed with the state.
Yeah.
So
maybe
do we want to
Kristen
just
can-
have that conversation, so that way people would have time, if they wanted to look at the pest management regulations online and to look at our current plan? Does that sound like a,
Kristen
Okay.
dug it
Yeah.
up.
oh, yeah,
That's what's up.
oh, the
I
plan,
have
Right.
the links from the website that I can forward to everyone. I
Okay.
can print them all out if you want to.
for our plan or for the pest management regulations?
I can link to both if you want, or print them all out, both.
Okay,
So our plans are available online
Our
by school,
plans,
by
okay.
address, and the regulations are on that same
got it.
online available by state guidelines.
Kristen, did you want to reply?
Just that there's an indoor and outdoor for both school, for each school.
Okay. So if it's all right with people, maybe, Mr. CUNY, you could forward us the links to where our plans are on the website and where the general policies are, unless it's both together?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right. So, any other questions or comments on the pest management policy tonight? So the next one, there's a building and grounds management policy in the state templates. We do not currently have one in the book that I found, that Sharon found. And so I do know we have certain procedures that we follow and traditions, and rec department takes care of certain parts of the grounds and the school department takes care of others. And so the question is, do we have a buildings and grounds policy but not a school committee policy? And if it's not written down, do we want one either just to have a list of what our procedures are, or do we want to have a school policy? Do you have a comment, Mr. Cuna, on that?
I'm unaware of an official policy. I'm aware of a lot of probably rumors of what may have happened in the past between town and school and town and rec and so forth. Some of those people are no longer here anymore, so some of us are trying to play catch up on some of that. So I think I would have to do a lot of research to figure out where that may exist, or who would know any of that. So, but I would like to see one, or at least have some general guidelines to participate in.
I'm looking at you, Mr. Murphy, as the member of the rec department. Do you have any thoughts on how to proceed with this?
If what everybody's alluding to was the old 10 feet within the
Yeah.
building and that type of stuff, I think that's been established that it's not written down anywhere, but somebody came up with it at some point.
It's part of the contracts.
Yeah, I don't think it's in the contract.
Not in the contract, no.
It's not in our contracts, I know that, because we checked it once.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not clear on what we mean by a building and grounds policy. I mean, we have a building and grounds department, and we have somebody who runs that department, just like we have a whole bunch of other departments. I guess I'm curious as to what a school committee policy on building and grounds should look like. We have a department that takes care of our building and grounds, because that's important, but we hire somebody in charge of that department, and that's what they do. You know, if we have to have a policy saying that we encourage that our buildings and grounds be taken care of properly, I guess we could do that, but I'm not sure that's necessary. If you're talking about who takes care of within 10 feet of the building, we could have all the policies that we want, but we're dealing with a union for the town workers and the union for the school workers with contracts and things like that. And like I say, all the policies in the world aren't gonna change the practices, and right now, whatever the practice is what it's always been. And if we wanna seriously try to change that, I think we have to have some negotiations with our union, have some discussions with the rec, and they have the similar negotiations with their union, so everybody agrees on something. So if that's an ongoing problem, Bob, and I know it flares up every now and then it goes away, and if it's an ongoing problem that you found some value in trying to resolve, then I can certainly talk to over the rec and have a subcommittee, the rec subcommittee, the schools talk about what we think it should look like, and then we're each gonna have to approach our respective unions during contract negotiations and try to get that into the mix. So that's gonna be a long road, but, you know, we can certainly do that. But a policy by the school committee that the rec department is gonna have to clean within 10 feet of our building because we don't wanna do it anymore, that's not gonna, you know.
So I'd like to make, Mr. Nelson, go ahead.
Yeah, just a comment, putting on my lawyer hat. Sometimes when you have policies, particularly with respect to buildings and grounds, and somebody gets hurt, it just opens up a potential window of liability, because someone is gonna say, well, you had a policy over there, and you didn't comply with it perfectly, and now we're gonna bring a lawsuit against you folks. If you don't have a policy, it makes it more difficult, I think, sometimes for people to establish liability if anyone gets hurt. So, you know, in a perfect world, it might not be a bad idea to have it, but it might also be a good idea not to have it. No, I'm not sure we need it.
So I'd like to suggest maybe that we put this into the would you please mull it over category. Dr. Conti and Mr. Cuna, if you would mull over this issue of what you think would be helpful to you to moving forward or not, to leave it the way it is. Does that sound satisfactory? Liable. Okay. So, and the other issue that's connected to this, we've been talking a lot about our policy of only using organic materials, and so that seems like it would have been in this kind of a policy if we had one. And I have not been able to find a policy, and people remember voting on it. So we may need to just wait until Mrs. Gilbert is back, because it may be that she knows where it is. But I just wanted to raise that as, that is an issue that people felt was important to have be a policy. And so I want to clarify that. Okay, yeah. Yep, yes, Mrs. Monaco.
I'd like to suggest, since we have a mull it over category,
Okay,
I would like to suggest that the committee take the time between now and the next meeting to mull over the list of policies that are on here. These support services policies are basically what the MASC has come up with. We don't have them all, we only have a few of them. We might want to adopt a couple that are similar to the template MASC has put out. We might not, but I think rather than cover every single one of these things in a long discussion, if we mull them over, do we need a policy on this, do we need a policy on that? And then we could conclude at the next meeting, when we have the first reading, whether or not we want to construct policies on any of these other things.
well, if I could counter that proposal, because there's two other policies that you and I discussed, Mrs. Monaco,
Okay.
that I would like to go over tonight, and the rest of them, I feel like I don't feel the need to add any policies just because they're on this list. But I would encourage the rest of the committee to look through the list, and if there is something that they are curious, what would that be, to go ahead and look at it. It's on the website. It's on the MASC website. So if we could continue with the last two policies that I wanted to consider whether we, again, these are not policies I'm proposing.
Oh, these are the conduct on the bus?
Yes, so there's two more.
Yep.
And I know we're trying to get through it, but, so the buildings and grounds we're done with for now, and we'll see what Dr. Conti and Mr. Cuna want to do. So we do not have a policy for student conduct on school buses. We do have in all of our school student handbooks expected school conduct. But I would like to, and I think, Ms. Monaco, you agreed with me, that it might be helpful to have a general overall school policy that would involve three things. And one is that it's a privilege and a responsibility, and the responsibilities to ride on the public school bus, the issues of safety, and then that to specify that the specifics of student conduct would be listed in your student handbook, because the expectations for elementary school, middle school, and high school could be a little bit different. And so I had put together after Mrs. Monaco and I met, that draft policy that I did send to people, that's just got these three paragraphs that say the three things I just mentioned. So if people are interested, they can look through this draft, and we could bring it back as a first reading next time. Is that good? And reading, okay. And then the other side of that is that I would like for Dr. Conti and his staff to review the student handbooks regarding student conduct on buses, because when I did a brief look, I found some discrepancies between the various buildings, and I just want to be clear that if it's because it was elementary and middle school, then that's fine, but if one says somebody's responsible and another says somebody else is responsible, I want to make sure that we're clear about who's responsible for student conduct on the buses. Okay? So that's the student conduct on school buses. And also there's just for the school committee's understanding, there's a JICC number along with the EEAEC. So under the J section, this would also be listed, it would be cross-referenced under, and that J section is students. So we would add it to that section as well, because it would be under students. And then the last one is that the list of possible policies includes one called the School Bus Safety Program. I don't think that Mrs. Monaco or I are proposing that we have a new policy, but I wanted to ask Dr. Conti, do we do school bus safety training regarding boarding, exiting, emergency evacuations, and safe conduct while aboard? I mean, at the beginning of the year, do the kids do like bus evacuation drill, that kind of stuff?
I think I know the early grades, the kindergarten teachers sort of get the kids familiar with the bus, especially since we send them home alone. They usually walk them onto the bus in the afternoon. I mean, I think there's some, I'm not sure we necessarily have a policy or college training, but I'm saying I think we do that, and any student who's having difficulty, we certainly work with them on the bus. But I'm trying to think, I don't think we have a bus curriculum per se.
Yes, Mrs. Russo?
My kids do that thing with the police where they show them how to jump off the back and exit and that whole thing in the beginning of the year.
Okay, Mr. Cuny, you have more information, I guess. Please,
Just misbehaving?
No,
Please let us
they
know.
show them how to jump.
So our 4 elementary schools do actually schedule with the police department and the bus company to bring the bus companies on site. They schedule the students to go out in grades with their teachers onto the buses. They have a training with the bus drivers and the police department. They do schedule or plan the evacuation out the back of the bus if need be. The principals are there in attendance as well too. And then the students usually at that point head on into lunch. But that does happen and has already happened at our 4 elementary schools already this year.
okay, and for me, knowing that we're doing that, I don't feel the need for a policy. Is there anyone else who would like, can we rule this policy out at this point? Okay. And the only other thing is that, if possible, before we bring them back, with the wording sort of written out so people can look at them for a first reading on the ones we did say we wanted to look at, does it make sense? I think I'd like to suggest we get them reviewed by our counsel, our legal counsel. Does that seem appropriate?
I don't think it's necessary.
You don't think
on
it's
this.
necessary for these? Okay,
These are so basic, I don't think it's necessary.
all right. Okay. All right, so I think we have completed the discussion of the support services policy, and I will be sure to have the drafts of the ones or the updates of the ones that we discussed tonight. And I would like to request, Dr. Conti, that you begin to think about the next section that you would like our subcommittee to look at, okay? All right, thank you. Now we're up to new business. And the first item is the collection policy that I referenced earlier. And if you would,
Thank you,
please.
Madam Chair. I think there's been a draft. Is it in your packet?
Yes.
And so, Nicole, you want to discuss the
Sure.
draft?
So I had touched base with Sharon to see if we had anything existing on this. As you recall, in the Powers and Sullivan report, there was a recommendation to have some sort of language and policy regarding collections. Sharon had found what you see in your packet, basically the whole top portion with the exception of the last 3 paragraphs. And I'm not sure, I can't recall if this was something that was adopted or if it was just like a procedural thing that had come before the committee before. So basically the last 3 sentences, the last 3 paragraphs there, the language that I've added regarding collection
Okay.
efforts. Just
right.
more of a notification of letting people know what they have outstanding early on. And then once it gets past 90 days, to sort of let them know that we'd be willing, to work with them if, they need a payment plan or something like that, which we have found successful in the past.
Okay. Comments?
That's good.
Looks good.
Mrs. Russo?
I just had a question. Have we looked at that, because it has the rate schedule, how long ago was it that we looked at the rates in comparative to other districts or?
So I actually did a comparison
Oh.
about 2 months ago.
Okay.
I didn't share it with you guys, but I just pulled surrounding
Okay.
communities, see basically what they were charging for, classroom, cafeteria, what
Right.
buildings, and we were pretty comparable, but I can share that with the committee if
Okay.
you'd like.
Great, thank you. The
Great.
rest looks good. Thank you.
All right. I have one question on the new part. The balances over 60 days, and then the balances over 90 days would receive a letter. And I'm wondering if after 60 days it would be appropriate for a letter, or does this seem enough time to just wait for the 90 days for the letter? And was this based on general practice, or,
Well, so the 60, they get an invoice and a
An
score
invoice.
statement, yeah.
so you
So
don't feel that
they still do get some sort of written notification,
Okay.
just not a letter.
So that you feel like that's a satisfactory collections approach, to just send the invoice again? Okay,
That was what I was suggesting, but.
all right. And Dr. Conti seems to think it's good too, so any other questions or comments? So that's a first reading. And then my other suggestion is that under number 3, if we could change it for 2 hour, under number 3, the custodial fees of 2 hours per person. If we could change that, that would be nice to update. Okay, thank you. Unless other people disagree. No, okay. All right, anything else on the first collections, first reading? New collections, first reading? No. Okay. Now, Dr. Conti, I bet this is the minute you've been waiting for. Planning for Success 2019 to 2022. So we have, okay, you'll explain it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, the format of this should seem familiar by now. We just completed our first 3-year Planning for Success process. This is a document that I believe is always in draft form, so it'll be changing, but some of the structures will stay the same. This is a first reading. The Planning for Success, we're also saying, is the district improvement plan, which by regulation you are required to approve every year. So this is going to count for that. And I think the first part of the document, again, is relatively straightforward. Talks about the Planning for Success process. I think when you get to page 5, the mission, vision, core values, theory of action are things that you've seen before. The school committee hasn't necessarily changed their mission or vision or core values or haven't added to them. I think where you start to see changes are the district strategic objectives. We've done some work with the principals and with the larger district leadership team around the portrait of graduate work, which we'll talk about. But there's really 4 objectives, and again, most of the learning folks are concerning themselves in the top 3. Why 3 and not 10? Again, Mr. Nelson starts, if we're focusing on 10, we're not focusing on any. So we're really looking at learning, equity, and then relationships. Culture and relationships would be the 3 areas that the learning side of the house is mostly focused on. And I believe, obviously, as an organization, we have to have a facilities and finance goal, and we'll talk about that as well. We're spending a lot of time, we spent a lot of time tonight on that, and obviously, we've been spending a lot of time on the finance area as well. So I think those are the three areas. When you turn to page 6, we tried to put this in a chart where you would have the objective on the left-hand side, some of the initiatives we're working on in the middle, and then some of the outcomes that we're projecting that you'll see. I guess as a recommendation, maybe as you look at this, you can certainly contribute to the objectives. I think they're broad enough where we can almost fit anything in that you would want us to under those things. I'm not sure we would be a school district without some sort of learning objective, but I'm saying I think we can fit something under there. If there's an initiative that you'd particularly like to see, or if you think there's an initiative that's missing, it's going to be really hard for us to include every single thing that we do because things are changing, but make sure there's an area that you feel like you can target. But I think most importantly, if there's an outcome that you want us to really focus on that you don't think is listed, please make sure that you give us input on the outcome, because where we'll see the outcomes, I think, are where we'll put our attention. So, I think that we can go through every single one of these, but I'd rather have you take some time and sort of go through the structure of the document. But again, we're really focused on learning, on equity, on cultural relationships, and on facilities and finance would be the 4 areas that I would say. We're going to have plans that come through the budgeting process in January and February that you see. So there'll be versions of this that are done, I think, from the preschool, from the elementary schools, from the middle school, from the high school. So there'll be 4 versions of this that, again, will take the same structure in terms of culture, learning, equity, cultural relationships, and facilities and finance. So each level will present their school improvement plans to you in that time frame when they present their budgets. So again, you'll see the same format. In terms of facilities and finance, when we get to that time as well, we'll see some outcomes, some 3-year plans, both from the business office and from Bob's office, and regarding some of the outcomes that they'll be working on, some of the areas of focus that they'll be working on, again, over the next 3 years with more specificity. So again, you'll see the more specificity again at each level, and in the finance and the facilities office as we move forward. So again, an example of that would be clearly we need to put more input, more information on our 10-year capital plan. That's going to be something that's going to be the focus of, obviously, the facilities office. And I think in terms of some of the action planning that you've seen in response to the Powers and Sullivan report, there was a suggestion that we may need an accounts payable person again, and you'll see that justification moving forward in terms of finance. So you'll see more specificity. All of our employees, including myself, in the new evaluation system, which I'm not sure is so new anymore. There are some changes to the superintendent. I think some of the initiatives and elements that the committee said that they would look at. I think we're going to bring Darren out to do some training. Obviously, everyone needs a student learning goal and a professional practice goal. Mine are trying to be as sort of inclusive as possible, because there are many people actually that contribute to the obtainment of the objectives in the district more than just myself. So again, the student learning goal, I just wanted to spend some time with this. It's obviously connected. It's a separate item on the agenda, but it's connected to the district improvement plan, or the planning for success document. So the student learning goal is, over the next 3 years, I'll continue to promote and model engaged learning by focusing on developing a growth mindset among staff, seeing the opportunities for all students to learn and develop regardless of their ability, disability, age, gender identity, or cultural and linguistic background. In doing so, I'll provide ongoing support to empower the district leadership team, teachers, and staff as they work to increase student motivation and achievement, productivity, and well-being, so students attain the skills and knowledge they need for success in college, career, and civic life as measured by evidence in the Burlington Public Schools determined qualitative and quantitative assessments. So again, we spent a lot of time at the start of the meeting, earlier in the evening, talking about some quantitative assessments that we go over, but we'll continue to have measures of growth, I think, both quantitatively and qualitatively as we have moving forward. If you'd like to see, again, certain evidence presented, we can always look at that. I'm not sure we have everything measured, but we can certainly bring students out. I think some of the most effective evidence that we can provide, I think, when you are visited by students and they speak to all of their accomplishments themselves, and I think there's no better measure of success than what the students are expressing. The professional practice goal, again, during the span of the Planning for Success years, I'll lead and model respectful and kind discourse grounded in the Burlington Public Schools vision and core values as the means to, 1, ensure productive two-way communication across the district and within the community, And 2, increasing the capacity of all staff, including the district leadership team, in the areas of collaboration, teacher leadership, and cultural competency through professional development. Again, as evidenced through feedback received from staff, the district leadership team, and the community. So I do a 360 feedback survey every year that you've seen for the last 11 years, and you'll continue to see that as one measure of feedback from anyone who wants to provide anonymous feedback. But again, if there are specific things, reports, audits, one of the, that you want to see, then we would try to do our best to provide that to you. One of the things that some districts are starting to do now, which I'm very interested in, for instance, is an equity audit, bringing someone in to look at some of our practices through a lens of equity, and just to make sure we're practicing what we preach, that our policies are aligned, who has access to certain programs, in terms of issues that can arise. So that might be something that you would want to see as an outcome based on that moving forward. So again, really looking for you to spend some time with this at the next meeting. Even if you need an additional meeting, I don't think there's a rush to do this, because again, the document's going to be always changing. But the general direction of really where we're focusing it's not changing drastically, but we're updating it and really trying to make sure we can articulate to everyone in the organization and the community what our areas of focus are and what we're trying to do and where we're trying to hit. So that's the point of the Planning for Success document.
The agenda says approval on the goals. Do we
Yes.
need to vote on that tonight?
Well, this is the Planning for Success, so this is a first reading. So if you have comments on that, and then the next item is the superintendent's goals. Do you have a different document to give us for that?
No, again, the
No,
goals are
you've read
included
them.
here.
These are your two
I
goals.
just read the goals.
Okay.
But again, the document itself, I think, it was meant to be a first reading, Ms.
Whole
Monaco.
thing, even the goals at the end?
No, and the goals you could take a vote tonight on the goals as well, so.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve the goals.
Second.
All right, any further discussion?
No.
Sounds good to me. So all those in favor?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. It's 500. Thank you that's a lot of words that are hard to parse out, and I know it takes time to think about these and make it a thoughtful document, so that's good, thank you. And that means that we are up to our next category of public participation. Is there anyone else who would like to speak before we have no other items on the agenda?
Just, again, one other brief announcement. I just wanted to, again, I mentioned it briefly, but there is a joint Senate-House bill that concerns state funding for public education. I think it indicates a significant increase. The formula hasn't been changed since 1993, so it's been about 25 years. The majority of the additional state money, and they're talking about $1.5 billion over the next 7 years, are going to go to communities that really need it. So we won't see a huge increase in Chapter 70, even though I think there'll be an increase in minimal aid that we will see. I think there are parts of this bill, though, that are going to be very helpful to us. And what they're saying is over the next 7 years, right now a circuit breaker, only tuitions are eligible for circuit breaker relief from districts. And what the state is talking about doing is over the next few years, I think it's going to be at 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%, incorporates special ed transportation for out-of-district placements, will be eligible for circuit breakers. So that'll impact every district, and Burlington as well, significantly.
And that will impact the accommodated account, correct?
That will impact the accommodated account.
In
Again,
terms of
we'll be
adding income.
adding income, more state revenue to that account. And then I also think, again, the increase in the cap from MSBA is also something that may impact Burlington, going from $600 million to $750 million a year. So again, I don't think Burlington won't see the majority of the windfall from this legislation if it becomes law, but there are certainly aspects of it that will help communities like Burlington and every community in the Commonwealth. So again, I'm not sure if you want to take a position as a committee at some point as you learn more about it, but certainly if you wanted to contact Senator Friedman and Representative Gordon, that you support, again, them increasing the amount of state funding that is going towards public schools. There are many groups that work towards the passage of this bill. I think the Foundation Budget Review Commission at this point is 4 or 5 years old. This was a joint bill that failed 2 sessions ago, and I do think we're excited that the joint bill came out, and again, hoping the Senate passes it, the House then passes it, and the governor signs it into law. So,
Do you know when they're going to be voting on it?
I think the Senate's going to be looking in 2 weeks,
Okay.
is what the schedule that we got, but of
Alright.
course, I'm not in charge of that schedule.
Yes.
Senator Spilka would do that, and then I think the Senate is going to vote first, then the House will follow, and then I believe they're hoping to get it on the governor's desk, I hope before the end of the year,
One comment, Madam Chair.
Yes.
It would have been nice, I don't know if it's too late for anybody in the legislature to look at this issue, but it would have been nice if they, with respect to the extra $150 million that they're gonna set aside for school building resources, that they tied that into schools who are doing repairs rather than full renovations, because every year Burlington loses out on the high school because we maintain our schools well, and we're just looking to keep the school in good shape. And we always lose out to the communities that let their schools fall apart, and then they add this $150 million, but it might not help us.
And again, I think MSBA might adjust the regulations. I think what they were initially looking for, though, was just access to more funding. So I think this is gonna be the first step, and maybe we can make that suggestion to the MSBA,
nice if they tweak the
and
regulations.
they could change the regulation. But again, I
In a
do
hurry.
think, this is 25 years in the making, or again, they haven't really changed. They've changed the amounts of the state funding formula, but this is a significant investment in the state in terms of public education. So I do wanna, there's a lot of effort that went into it from a lot of people.
In terms of follow-up, again, I've heard this bill referred to by a number of different names. Do you know, so if we do contact our state rep and our state senator, do you know what the name of this bill is now?
Oh, it's student opportunity, and it's A, it must be
Student Opportunity
I think it's ACT, but.
Act, something like that,
It's SOA.
SOA, and it would certainly be the Education Funding Formula Bill. Would that be a generic term for it? Educational Funding Bill, Formula Bill.
It's the Student Opportunity Act, yes.
Student Opportunity Act, good job, thank you.
Since it's
Diana.
half an hour past my bedtime, I'm feeling good
I
about
know.
it.
All right,
Remember that.
so, yes, Mr. Murphy
Just one
has
other
something else to
question,
say.
and you might have talked about this before I got there, or got here this
Okay.
evening. I had sent around a request from the rec department about a certain kind of fertilizer or something that they wanted to use. And I got some feedback, and then I kind of lost track of it. But I wanted to report back to Brendan. And Bob, you might have already talked to him, I don't even know, but he was going to be using some sort of a fertilizer on the parks. He wanted to use them on the ball fields as well, for the fields that are on school property. He called it an organic product of some sort. So I don't know if anybody had a chance to look at that. Chris, I know you responded, and then you were gonna be talking to Brendan or something. If there was any consensus or any feedback for me to give to him, I'll pass it along. If we're still thinking about it, I'll tell him we're still thinking about it.
Okay, so what's your feedback?
At this point, I don't think we have a consensus.
Okay.
We're still waiting for Brian to get back to us.
Okay,
Um,
that's fine.
but-
Like I said, I didn't know if it came up earlier,
We
so,
want to hear the
No.
all-organic plan that they said they could come up with.
okay. All right, I'll let him know.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for following up. We did have some discussion earlier, if you had a
Okay.
chance to, but not specifically about the fall fertilizer. Okay, any other questions, comments, announcements? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye. We are now adjourned.